Howdy my totally tubular gamers, we're back with another video, and yes, you read that title correct. You see how long this video is. It is time for the top 60 games of 2024. Yes, top 60. Let's get to it.
With 2024 officially over, done, finished, whatever you want to call it, it's time we look at the best games of the entire year. I think when it came to the games that released in 2024, it was a pretty good year. It wasn't a banger of a year like 2023, but it was still pretty good. From the smallest of indie games all the way up to the big AAA, there was plenty of quality and a little something for everybody. I tried my absolute hardest to play as many games as I possibly could in 2024. I really tried to play like every major release that came out this year. And while there were a few I missed, sadly, like Dragon Age and Indiana Jones, I still played a metric ton of games. And today I'm gonna rank them. This is the biggest list I have ever done, and it's going to be quite the undertaking. Shoot, even just coming up with this list was quite the challenge, but I really just want to talk about as many amazing games as I possibly can. What's even crazier is that some games I played this year didn't make the cut. Yeah, they didn't make the top 60. And I guess it just goes to show how many games I played this year. I also swear that I touch grass on a near daily basis. It might seem hard to believe with me playing all these games, but I assure you it's true. It feels like in 2024 I went on this long journey where I experienced a lot of experiences. So join me as I reminisce and go over my top 60, yes, 60 games. So get the popcorn, get the beef jerky, get the Wendy's spicy nuggets, start going to bed, start the car up, set the video speed to 1.5 speed, however you're gonna watch or listen to this video, get comfortable. We're gonna be here for quite a while. I will make sure to have accurate timestamps since I don't expect anybody to watch or listen to this in one sitting, but I know there's a totally tubular marathoner out there somewhere. As always with my list, this is purely just my own opinion. All of this is based off of my own experiences. I have played all of these games, and you are free to agree or disagree with this entire list. You can let me know down below. I'm always lurking down there, so I'd love to hear it. Let's get a discussion going. I do also want to put it out there will be no DLCs or remasters on this list. Sorry Shadow of the Erdtree and sorry Shadow Generations, you won't be here. Last thing to bring up, and then I promise the long ass intro is over. Please like, share, comment, subscribe. I got the Patreon and the super thanks. Any support is truly, and I mean truly, greatly appreciated. I don't have a team helping me or anything like that. It really is just me, Jonathan, playing these games, editing this video, doing this voiceover, the entire video's production, it's all me. And so any support, it really does mean the world to me, and I greatly appreciate it. And if you even made it to this part of the video, thank you. Seriously, thank you. This is a long ass intro and we need to get on to this list. So with all that sappy stuff done, I'm sure you're wondering, what is in last place? What just barely made the cut? What's number 60? Forgive Me Father 2 is the game that slides into the number 60 spot, which left early access in 2024. If you're unfamiliar with this one, it is a throwback boomer shooter, and despite its placement on this list, I still think it's an alright game. Obviously, there are a lot of other games that I enjoyed more this year, but I still think there is some fun to be had here. So the premise and setup is at least mildly interesting. You play as this priest who's locked up in a mental asylum who's really going through the thick of it as he battles creatures and Cthulhu-like monsters. And of course he has a voice talking to him throughout with a really strange accent. I actually didn't care for the story or characters of this game. I found it all to be kind of annoying if we're being real, but you're not playing a boomer shooter for the story, lore, characters. You're playing it because, you know, you want to shoot things. And when it comes to that, Forgive Me Father 2, yeah, it's alright. It's a pretty standard affair as far as boomer shooters go. You kill everything in sight, you move through some very linear levels collecting key cards in order to progress, with the occasional set piece showing up here and there, like when you get just completely swarmed by enemies. There's a variety of different weapons, and as you play the game more, you unlock more and more. Some are clearly better than others, but it's cool that you have a decent roster of weapons, and they've all got a nice kick to them. But what's a good arsenal if you don't have a bunch of enemies to shoot? The enemy roster in this game is okay. They aren't the most varied in terms of tactics, but at least there's usually a lot of them on screen. When it comes to the level design, yeah, it really is nothing special. If you've played any throwback boomer shooter, you're going to know exactly how all of these levels play out. And I wouldn't exactly say that the level design or encounters are all that memorable, but you know what is memorable? This game's art style. It's why I was even drawn to the game in the first place. I think the game actually has a really cool art style. There aren't a lot of games that look like it, and it gives it some much needed personality. It's got a cool aesthetic and the game does have its moments. If you're a hardcore FPS junkie, this one might be one worth checking out. At the very least, I did have a few hours of fun. So in the number 59 spot we have Squirrel with a Gun. I still can't believe this game is actually real. Like, this is a video game you can play from start to finish. It isn't just some shittily made meme, and it really is all about a squirrel with a gun. And this isn't like a cartoon squirrel with a little weapon. No, this is a realistic looking squirrel with realistically proportioned weapons. So yeah, it's giant in the squirrel's hands. And the game is just as hilarious and weird as you would expect. I think the most comparable game is probably Goat Simulator. You're just kind of dropped into these open areas and you're given just a bunch of random weird tasks that you can complete in any order. The main collectible is these golden acorns and you'll need them to proceed. Along the way you'll kill plenty of Department of Homeland Security personnel. There's even a few boss fights and you'll get to do some cool tricks in a little car. And it's all just as strange as it sounds, but it'll never not be funny seeing this little squirrel get sent flying back from the kick of some of these weapons. And it's actually a gameplay mechanic as well. There's a good amount of 3D platforming in this game and it's all done from shooting the weapon straight down and flying into the air, and yeah, it's as janky as it sounds. This is a pretty janky game, but it totally plays it up and it's usually pretty funny. This is one of the funnier games to come out this year, and I can appreciate it's not just a one-trick pony when it comes to its comedy. It's more than just haha, that little squirrel is a big gun. No, there's actually several different situations you find yourself in that made me laugh, and I found the game to be rather entertaining for its short runtime, outside of the last area with some really suspicious 3D platforming. But if you're looking for just a goofy, silly little game that involves a squirrel wiping out an entire neighborhood and killing hundreds of people with a realistic weapon, this might be the game for you. I'm not going to say it's the best squirrel game of all time. That's always going to be Conker's Bad Fur Day, but it's a good runner-up. So the next game we have is A Quiet Place: The Road Ahead. So when I first saw this game, I went, oh no, this doesn't look very good at all. This looks like The Walking Dead Survival Instinct. This is just going to be licensed shovelware, isn't it? But after playing through the game, I can tell you, it's actually pretty decent. This isn't one of the very best horror games of the year, but it certainly was better than I expected. So it takes place adjacent to the movies where all of these creatures show up that can't see anything and react purely to sound. And it sees our main character really just trying to survive in this horrible world. She has severe anxiety, she's pregnant, and pretty much everyone she's ever known and loved is dead. The story and characters are pretty whatever in this game, and by the end of it I felt just kind of indifferent, but the world of Quiet Place will always be interesting to me. When it comes to the gameplay, they try to do something a little different. They play up, them being quiet. It's very sound based. Every action in this game emits a certain level of sound, and it's up to you to try to be as quiet as possible. Walking around emits sound, opening doors. Really, anytime you interact with the environment, sound is going to be emitted. Or when you're taking a shot from your inhaler, which there are a comical amount of in this game, and you're going to be hitting that inhaler pretty frequently since your character has severe anxiety. So outside of managing your sound levels, what you're really doing in this game is just moving from point A to B with the occasional set piece or moment where the monsters show up and you actually have to either distract them or try to get past them. There isn't any combat in this game. You cannot fight back whatsoever. The most you can do is find sand to muffle your footsteps and move as slowly as possible. There's also not really any puzzles here, so the gameplay boils down to you slowly moving through these environments, just trying not to get mauled. And while this gameplay isn't the most exciting, I mean it is very slow paced, I can really appreciate that they actually tried to do something different here. They really built a game around The Quiet Place, and I think for the most part they do a good job. The game looks decent enough, and it ended before it truly got repetitive around the 5 to 6 hour mark. If you're a fan of the movies, or maybe you're looking for a different kind of horror game, this might be one to check out. I'm certain it will be dirt cheap sooner than later, so get it while it's on sale. So here we have a game you probably didn't expect. It is the Patrick Star game. This one was put out by Outright Games, and I had pretty low expectations for it. Outright Games have put out nothing short of shovelware, but this game, it's actually okay. It's not one of the best SpongeBob games, that's for sure, but it's an entertaining few hours. It really is all about Patrick, complete with basically no objective. He just wakes up and wanders around Bikini Bottom and stuff happens around him. And you know what? That's perfect for him. He's Patrick after all, and you get to interact with a bunch of famous residents of Bikini Bottom, such as SpongeBob, Squidward, Sandy, Mr. Krabs, etc. And they'll all give you small, random tasks you'll have to do. I think the gameplay is probably most comparable to Goat Simulator. I can't believe I've made two separate comparisons to Goat Simulator in less than 10 minutes, but I can assure you this is the last one in this video. But it's a good comparison. You find yourself wandering around this decently sized open world recreation of Bikini Bottom, just doing random tasks for characters. There's a bunch of odd challenges, and it's all very physics based. It's also super janky. Like, the game knows it's janky as well. This makes the GTA 4 swing set look like Sesame Street. You're constantly flying into the air, hitting the skybox, falling through the floor, and the game totally expects you to do it. There's actually challenges to do both of those things. And the stuff they have Patrick doing looks nothing short of ridiculous. Jumping around with these jellyfish, constantly being electrocuted, cleaning stuff for Sandy, and even participating in another Fry Cook games. And along the way, there's a ton of fan service to new and old SpongeBob, and that's all you could really want at the end of the day from a game like this. Playing through this game, it really wasn't anything special. It's rather unrefined. Like I mentioned, it's janky, it's buggy, the presentation, yeah, it's just not very good. It's clearly very budget, but you know what? This game made me laugh, it made me smile, and I was entertained for like 2 to 3 hours, and I think that gets it on this list. While it's not a great game by any means, it could have been so much worse. So here we have a game that I know isn't super well liked, but I enjoyed it, and that is the casting of Frank Stone. This game was developed by Supermassive Games, the people who made the Dark Pictures anthology, Until Dawn, and The Quarry. And if you've ever played one of those games, you'll know exactly what you're in for, where you're actually watching the game for the most part. You get to make some choices, occasionally you get to walk around, examine the environment, you might solve the most minute of puzzles, and there's some quick time events here and there. The story is actually somewhat interesting. It takes place in the Dead by Daylight universe. It is a spin-off from Dead by Daylight, and it's all about this mysterious man, entity, thing known as Frank Stone. And I think the plot is actually rather interesting in this game. I think it actually ties back to Dead by Daylight incredibly well, and there's a ton of fan service here. If you're a fan of Dead by Daylight, I think you're going to actually really enjoy this game. You're going to be picking up what it's putting down. You'll be fixing plenty of generators and trying to avoid being put on a hook. I know the ending in particular has been a point of contention, but I actually kind of liked it, and it really does play into Dead by Daylight. I will say though, this is one of those games where if you don't like the story, you don't like the characters, you're probably not going to like this game. You're not playing a game like this for the gameplay. The gameplay is barely here, and while there certainly is more of it than say the Dark Pictures, it's not exactly the most prevalent. While you do get to make a bunch of choices throughout the game, unfortunately this is one of those games where they just don't really mean much in the end. So you might be wondering, why'd you even include it on a list like this? It doesn't seem like the game's very good. Well, I was digging the story, I like the characters, the game looks incredible, and I really liked piecing together the mystery that is Frank Stone. I'm not going to act like this is one of Supermassive's best. It is far away from Until Dawn, but I still found it somewhat enjoyable. If you're somebody who really loves Dead by Daylight and haven't tried this yet, I really recommend that you do. Everybody else, wait for a sale, wait for it to be included on PlayStation Plus or Game Pass, and then I think it's worth trying. It's not the longest game, and it made me jump a few times. Jump to the next game. Haha, got him. What a sick transition that was. Alright, but seriously, the next game we have here is Expeditions, a Mud Runner game. Now, if you're not familiar with the Mud Runner, Snow Runner series, this is the series of games that sees you driving trucks or other large vehicles through some really heavy mud. Well, actually, it's more than mud. There's several different environments you'll get to go through, like snow, desert, etc. But this game is a little different from those other ones. This one is all about going on expeditions. Instead of being all about hauling heavy shit from A to B, this one sees you going out into the wilderness, uncharted territory, and you get to just go explore for the most part. Occasionally you're given some other objectives like detecting seismic activity or finding some kind of specific location, but this game really emphasizes just exploring these big open areas, and you'll be going through some really heavy duty shit out here. There is no roads. There's nothing even close to a road. The best you get is like a dirt path. You're driving up mountains, you're going through the harshest of the desert, you're driving through the swamps, you're going through a lot more than just mud here. You're really going through the thick of it backyardigan style.
Into the thick of it! Into the thick of it!
And the game takes itself pretty serious with the driving and vehicle physics. One little bump can actually ruin your entire run. One little bump can cause you to flip over, and yeah, you're just shit out of luck. The game is simultaneously really chill and also nerve-wracking. It's chill when you're just taking your time driving through some mountains or a forest, and it can be incredibly nerve-wracking when you're going through a bunch of bumps and you're like, oh. Just try not to lose all your shit, including the vehicle. You're really going to need to plan out your routes here, and while I don't think this game gets as challenging or serious as SnowRunner, like that game really had you going through some shit, I still thought it was a good game. The game certainly has a lot more variety, especially with the missions compared to Mud and SnowRunner, but I actually really prefer SnowRunner to this game. I just prefer the mission structure. I like hauling big shit A to B, and I don't think the gameplay is all that refined in a few areas in Expeditions, but if you're looking for a very different kind of driving game, this might be the game for you. So here we have Life is Strange Double Exposure, the latest in the Life is Strange series. I have not spoken on this game whatsoever, and that's because I just finished it a few days ago, and I gotta say, I'm a bit conflicted on it. I actually love the original Life is Strange. I think it has a great story, some excellent characters, and while the writing can be a bit cringe at times, it was really endearing. And so when I saw that they're making a real sequel to the original game, I was pretty skeptical. But I wanted to reserve my judgment until I played all the way through it, and I gotta say, I think this game is just alright. So it takes place 10 years after the original Life is Strange, and it sees you once again playing as Max Caulfield. But now she's in a totally different setting. She's in the state of Vermont, has made new friends, and is still taking lots and lots of pictures. She's just trying to live a normal life when all of a sudden one of her friends is mysteriously killed, and it's up to her to investigate exactly what happened. And of course, some supernatural shit comes in. Now, this game is obviously a very narrative-focused experience, so if I don't like the narrative or the characters, I'm probably not going to like the game, and yeah, that's where my mixed feelings really come in. At the start of the game, I was really intrigued. I really wanted to see what was going to happen. Really, the first like 60% of the game, I was fully invested, and I was like, this is actually pretty good. But the second half of the game, particularly the ending, I feel like the story just kind of falls apart, and I really didn't care for this ending at all. It almost soured me on the entire game. But it's not all bad. The story has plenty of great moments. There's some good characters here, and it is somewhat memorable. It's just not great start to finish, and it doesn't hold a candle to the first game whatsoever. When it comes to the gameplay, it is very basic here. It really is just an adventure game where you interact with characters, you make choices that unfortunately don't mean all that much in the grand scheme of things, and you get to utilize Max's new power where she can switch between 2 different universes. And you'll frequently be jumping between these 2 different worlds to solve some minor puzzles in order to get some more info. The gameplay, it's pretty simplistic. At least like the other Life is Strange games, there's moments where you get to sit down, just take in the world and listen to some nice music, and I think this game does a really great job in that sense. It's got a nice aesthetic and art style to it, the vibes are there, and the music is really great. While I didn't love this story and by extension the game, I didn't hate it either. I just think that it was a little bit of missed potential. I expected more from it and would say that at the end of the day, this game, yeah, it's just alright, and it's probably the weakest Life is Strange game, which is a real shame. Still, if you're a fan of this series, you'll probably like this game. Everybody else, take it or leave it. So here's a game you probably forgot all about. It is Contra Operation Galuga. This is the latest in the long-running run and gun series, and it was developed by WayForward, the people who made the excellent Contra 4. And you know what? They actually did a good job here. This is easily the best Contra game in the last 15 years and one of the best ones overall. It's essentially a reimagining of the original game, seeing our man Bill and Lance invading this island and just blowing everything up Rambo style. They actually just understood the assignment here. They just want to give you some big guns, you move left to right and shoot everything in sight. It is that gameplay that this series is known and loved for. You can play through the entire game cooperatively, you can upgrade your weapons, you actually get to switch between 2 weapons like Contra 3, and it all feels really great. Some of the weapons do feel very good in this game. These levels are actually well designed also. There's plenty of set pieces, and the game can actually get kind of challenging. I won't lie, the level design and difficulty isn't as crazy as some of the older Contra games. It doesn't go balls to the walls difficult, but it's still got a little bit of a kick to it, if you know what I mean. If you're looking for just a fun run and gun experience that's like around the 2-hour mark, this might be one worth checking out. There actually is a good amount of replayability. There's a bunch of challenges, there's characters to unlock, and there's more to it than just playing through it once. But I also totally understand why most people didn't check it out when they saw the $40 price tag. The presentation doesn't exactly scream AAA or even budget really, but it's got a nice little art style to it. This is one game I totally think is worth checking out once it goes super cheap, especially if you've ever been a fan of this series or run and gun games in general. It doesn't reinvent the run and gun wheel, but it's a few hours of fun. So the next game we have here is one of the more unconventional ones. It is the Crush House. So this is essentially Love Island, the video game. If you're not familiar with Love Island, it is a reality dating show where a bunch of hot singles are put on this island and they're ready to mingle. I've watched way too much of this show, if we're being completely honest. I just like having it on in the background. Sometimes the drama actually gets pretty good, and this game basically is, what if that was a video game and you were the director? So you choose all of your hot singles that are ready to mingle. They all end up here at the Crush House for 5 in-game days, and it's your job to film all of the drama that unfolds. Sometimes the singles might be getting along, they might be holding hands, they might be hugging, they might even start making out. Sometimes they'll start arguing. Either way, the audience wants to see it. Sometimes the audience will want to see some really weird shit also. They'll want to see asses, they'll want to see feet. Shoot, sometimes they just want to see the toilet. I'm not even kidding. It's up to you to satisfy all of these audiences and of course still run a successful TV show. You'll still have to run ads in order to get money, but you don't want to miss any of that juicy drama. Sometimes the singles will even ask you to do things for them, and if you do it, you might progress this sinister plot that's going on in the background. Now, while the Crush House doesn't exactly have the most depth, and you can pretty quickly figure out the best ways to get just a ton of points and please your audience incredibly quickly, there are a few reasons that I actually do like this game. I love the premise of it, I really like the aesthetic, the music's kind of nice, and the gameplay is rather different from just about anything else I've ever played. While it really is as deep as a puddle, it does try to do something differently, and the game ends before it truly gets repetitive. It certainly is one of the stranger games to release this year, but if you're looking for something just completely different, this might be up your alley. But I guess there's totally the possibility that the only reason I like this game is because I like shitty reality television shows. But this game is basically just that, the video game. How could I not like it? So here we have the indie horror game Mouthwashing. If you're unfamiliar with this one, oh, you are in for a treat. So Mouthwashing is a first-person horror adventure that takes place aboard a space freighter. This space freighter, though, becomes stranded in the middle of space after a very suspicious crash, and it's about our 5 main characters and them really just descending into madness. And I don't want to say any more than that because this is a very narrative-driven experience, and it's a really good narrative. The plot is told pretty much completely out of order, so you have to piece everything together, and there's some really good mysteries here. The characters are also exceptionally well done. They all have incredibly distinct personalities. They're very different from one another. You see them go through several different arcs, and I thought all of them were pretty memorable. The dialogue can get pretty deep here also. I think the writing is good throughout. The narrative is very well done, and that's a good thing because there isn't much gameplay here. It's even more basic than Life is Strange. You really are just walking around this small ship interacting with characters and the environment, and that's really it. But at least this game has a really great art style. It goes for that PS1 low poly aesthetic, and I really dig how this game looks. The soundtrack is also very well done. All of this certainly helps get under your skin. This is a horror game after all. You want to be a little scary, and yeah, I think it gets scary. It's more of the creepy, unsettling vibe kind of scary instead of boo, jump out in front of you scary, but it still got to me, at least on a psychological level. If you know, you know. All I gotta say is if what I've described to you has piqued your curiosity at all, or what you've seen on screen interests you, I think you should check the game out. It's pretty memorable. So in the number 50 spot we have Palworld. It feels like this one might have come out a lifetime ago, but it released in January of 2024 into early access. Now normally I wouldn't include an early access game on a list like this, but Pocket Pair has never actually released a game before. All of their games have been stuck in early access, and who knows if Palworld will ever hit 1.0. I certainly hope it does, because when this game came out, it was absolutely taking the world by storm. People really did enjoy Pokemon with guns, but if you've actually played the game for more than 20 minutes, you'll quickly realize that this plays absolutely nothing like any Pokemon game, and it plays much more like Arc. The only areas where it really plays anything like Pokemon is the act of throwing a ball thing to catch these creatures, the pals, and having the pals battle each other. But for the most part, this is a survival game. You have to manage a bunch of different resources, you have to build a base up, you have to defend against invaders, and you've got a bunch of pals to help you to do it. You aren't just by yourself. And the pals are pretty essential to just about every aspect of this game, from traversal to combat to mining resources to building up your base. You're going to need as many of these cute fellas as possible that may or may not look like Pokemon. But what's crazy is even in its early access state, this game has some really compelling gameplay loops. Survival games are all about their loops. If the loops aren't fun, people aren't going to want to play it for hours and hours and hours. But Palworld, it actually does a pretty good job. It's funny, I don't really care much for survival games, but I wanted to try Palworld because it's what everybody was talking about, and I somehow ended up playing like 30 hours in just a few days. The poop loops certainly were compelling. We were getting stronger, I was getting new materials, I was finding new pals, exploring new areas, the base was getting better and better, and I just wanted to keep playing. Eventually though, like most people, I dropped off the game and haven't checked it out in about a year now. The game did have a decent number of issues, and I'm sure some of them have been fixed, but I haven't verified that myself. In 2025, maybe I'll come back to Palworld and see how things are, but as it stands, I think this is a fun early access survival game that is more than just the gimmick of Pokemon with guns. Like, yes, you can give the pals guns and it's never not funny, but this really is a pretty decent survival game. So here we have Rise of the Ronin. If you forgot about this one, let me refresh your memory. It was published by SIE, but it was developed by Team Ninja, the people who made Nioh, Stranger of Paradise, Wolong, etc. And it plays pretty similar to those games, but it's set in a big open world and takes place during feudal Japan. When it comes to the story, well, it's about as good as Team Ninja's other stories, which is, not very good. Team Ninja can excel in many areas when it comes to their games, but storytelling is not one of them. On paper, the story should be really great, but in execution, yeah, it's just not very good. I had a hard time really caring about these characters or where the story was going at all. You get to make several choices throughout, but they all felt rather meaningless. And I thought the dialogue along with the voice acting was just terrible. Seriously, the voice acting was just straight up atrocious in this game. Like, what happened here? If you're gonna play this game at all, switch it back to Japanese voice acting. It's much better. But you're not playing a Team Ninja game for a deep, riveting story or interesting characters. You're playing it because you expect some really great combat, and that is where Rise of the Ronin excels. The combat is fantastic in this game. It plays pretty similar to Wolong, where it is very parry-focused, and at times it certainly gives off Sekiro vibes. It's nowhere near as satisfying or fun as Sekiro's, but I think the combat is pretty good in this game. When you start parrying fools left and right, it actually does feel very satisfying. There is actually like a ton of depth to this combat. There's a bunch of different weapons, movesets, techniques you can learn. More so than any other Team Ninja game, I was pretty impressed with just how deep the combat is. The combat is easily the best part of this game, and it kind of carries the entire game. I mean, most of the game is combat. So you would hope that the combat is good, and it's not just good, it's great. And so you might be asking, well, why is Rise of the Ronin so far down the list? Unfortunately, Rise of the Ronin doesn't really do anything else good. It is an open world game, but this open world is incredibly lackluster. It is pretty big, and there's a lot to do in it, but the open world activities and side content is incredibly generic, cookie cutter, forgettable, and just all around unexciting, which is the perfect way to describe the open world in general. It's just flat, bland, and rather dull for the most part. And like the story, I had a hard time getting invested in it. The presentation's all over the place also. Sometimes the game looks good, and sometimes it looks terrible. The frame rate is rather suspicious and can be a little inconsistent, but all of this falls by the wayside when you're in combat. The combat really is that great, and I'm able to overlook all of this game's issues because the combat is so good. I hope in the future Team Ninja can take this amazing combat, put it in a linear setting with maybe a slightly better story, and we're going to have a really excellent game here. As for Rise of the Ronin, while I think it's a good game, it could have been so much better. So here we have maybe the most unconventional game on this entire list, which really is saying something, and that is Rabbit in Steel. If you haven't heard of this one, it is an indie game developed by just one person, and it's a weird mix of like a shmup and bullet hell with some MMO-like elements, on top of a somewhat roguelike structure. I know that was a lot of adjectives and terms being thrown at you, but let me try to explain. You and up to 4 players choose a cute rabbit and go up against a series of bosses. This game is just one big boss rush, but these bosses don't go down in 3 hits or even a few hits. These are all giant creatures that will take several minutes to defeat. You will be constantly chipping away at their health, attacking them consistently and waiting for your cooldowns to reset, and yeah, in that sense it is very similar to an MMO, but while you're doing all of this, you're constantly dodging all of the boss's attacks. They are constantly berating you with projectiles, and yeah, it starts to cover the entire screen. This is where it's more like a bullet hell. But there's a unique twist on it. If you're playing cooperatively, you'll frequently have to work with your teammates in order to dodge everything. So a lot of communication is required here. It also depends on how many other people you're playing with, obviously the boss, the difficulty, and how your run is going in general. It's actually pretty dynamic when it comes to gameplay, and the game can get incredibly challenging. You'll need to know how to dodge these attacks, you'll need to understand their patterns, and you'll need next level communication if you want to try to get through this game on the harder difficulty. And when it comes to this game's structure, it's more like a roguelike where you do runs, and if you die you have to start all over. But I gotta say, this is a really fun game actually. There is very few games that play anything like this, and I was surprised with how much fun I was having. It all just kind of comes together, and it was way better than I ever thought it was going to be. When I first saw it, I was like, oh, what's this cute little Wabbit game? But after a few hours of it, I was like, oh, this is a good game, and it's easily one of the biggest hidden gems of 2024. So I got another indie horror title. We have Five Nights at Freddy's Into the Pit. Now, when I first saw this, I really didn't know what to make of it. I was like, oh, this is very different from all the other FNAF games, and it's got pixel art. I wonder if this is even going to be scary. But after playing all the way through it, I gotta say, this is unironically one of the best Five Nights at Freddy's games. It really is nothing like the other FNAF games. You're not watching cameras, it's not in first person. It actually plays much more like an adventure game with some stealth sections where you're avoiding the animatronics and some minor problem solving. The story is actually pretty good, and it's probably the most coherent Five Nights at Freddy's story of them all. You play as this poor kid who goes to a rundown pizzeria and he plays in a ball pit when, I'll just say, some serious shit goes down. I actually found the story to be rather interesting. I was immediately engaged, and you didn't have to dig through a bunch of lore, shitty minigames, or game theory videos just to understand the plot and what was happening here. I thought it was actually good. And when it comes to actually playing this game, like I mentioned, it's more like an adventure game. Examining things in the environment, interacting with characters, hiding from animatronics when they show up to try to kill you. Sometimes there's quick time events, sometimes you have to use items on other items, but it's nothing too taxing, and if you're paying even a little attention, you're going to be able to figure out all of these puzzles. But the real question is the game even scary? It is pixel art after all. Well, let me just say, this is some really great pixel art, the animation is superb, and yes, I still think it is scary. It's not absolutely terrifying, but I found myself get scared on more than one occasion. I think this game is actually better than most people would believe, and I can actually recommend it even to people who are outside of the Five Nights at Freddy's circle. I think if you like horror games or you're looking for something different from FNAF, you might like this one. I mean, I'm just glad we got a game where we're not looking at cameras all night. Now we get to actually do something different. So here we have Senua's Saga Hellblade 2. Now, I played the first Hellblade and I thought it was pretty good. It told a really captivating story and I really wanted to see what was going to happen to Senua, so I was very interested in the second one. And while I don't think this game is as good as the first one and it clearly wasn't everybody's cup of tea, I still thought the game was good. When it comes to this game's narrative, it very much is a sequel to the first game. The first game absolutely is required reading, and this really just continues the story of Senua, her emotions, anxiety, psychosis, and all the crazy shit going on in her head. But there's also a lot of crazy shit going on outside of her head as she takes on these slavers who have basically ruined and killed her tribe, and she wants to avenge them. I actually think the story is pretty good in this game. There are some really great twists and turns that actually had my jaw drop, and I'm not afraid to admit it. Senua goes through a really great character arc, but what surprised me was there's a few more characters that also go through some decent arcs here as well. And it was a welcome addition to have these other characters. I genuinely really did enjoy the story all the way up until the end. The ending, at least in my opinion, was just way too abrupt. But for the most part, I think the story and its characters are actually pretty good. Something that was clearly a point of contention amongst gamers was the gameplay, or really the lack thereof gameplay. The first Hellblade had a good amount of gameplay to it. The second one has much less, but when it does show up, it is very similar to the first game. A majority of the game, like 70% of the gameplay, is you just walking forward, taking in the story. But there are a few times in the game where you do have to solve some really basic vision puzzles like the first game, and you actually do get into combat. The combat is even more basic than the first games. You're just kind of flailing the sword around and blocking. There's no skill points or leveling up or new moves or anything like that. But for the most part, I think it gets the job done. It's not like this is a long game. I finished it in under 6 hours, and I thought it was a pretty engaging experience start to finish. Sure, it's not the most involved, the gameplay isn't all that complex, but I like all types of games. I found the story really fascinating along with the world, and the game looks incredible. This is probably the best looking game of 2024. Like, this game just looks incredible top to bottom, from the characters, the facial animations, the animation in general, the environments. This game goes crazy when it comes to the presentation. And I could say the same about the acting and sound design as well. It's all top notch. I know this game isn't for everybody, but I actually like this one. So in the number 45 spot, yes, we're only at number 45, we have Wrath Ion of Ruin. If you forgot about this one, it came out earlier in the year and it is a throwback boomer shooter in the style of Quake. It actually even runs on the Quake engine, and you know what, for being a Quake engine game, I think it looks pretty good. And so naturally, for a game running on the Quake engine, you would imagine that it plays pretty similar to Quake, and you would be absolutely right. Congratulations, you won.
Congratulations, you won.
But yes, it does play very similar to Quake. You're dropped into these rather large environments and are told to pretty much just annihilate everything that moves. You're given a wide roster of weapons, each with its own alternate firing mode, and you get to eviscerate everything with a pulse. And it's actually pretty fun. All of the weapons feel incredibly satisfying to use, and the alternate fire modes just add even more variety to the combat. Something else that adds variety is just how many different enemy types there are. There's actually a lot of different types of enemies that show up in this game, and usually they show up in just some really big numbers. Some levels have over 1,000 enemies. I'm not even exaggerating here. Wrath features 15 levels, but each one of these levels is going to take you like an hour to get through. Like, some of them are just gargantuan, but they actually do a really good job of funneling you through them. And of course, like all other boomer shooters, it is a very linear affair here. You're just going from point A to B, and you'll have to occasionally find some keys in order to progress. But thankfully, Wrath has some pretty good level design, much better than, say, Forgive Me Father 2's. Now, I would actually say that this game has some of the best combat of any shooter in 2024. It's really fast-paced, it's engaging, it's challenging, it's fun, and it's incredibly satisfying. And so you might be wondering, well, if that's the case, why is it placed as low as it is? Well, I do have a few issues with it. I think this game is a little too drawn out, in my opinion. Some levels do start to drag, and I feel like the game takes just a little too long to finish. The save system is also kind of stupid, the boss fights aren't great, and the music is very disappointing. Like, it's just straight up bad. What happened here? It's just straight bird shit. But outside of that, Wrath is a pretty good game. If you're looking for a fast-paced, fun boomer shooter, this is one you should have your eye on at the very least. And I will give the game this. For being a Quake engine game, I think it is very impressive. So here we have another game that just did not get enough attention in my opinion, and that is Amanda the Adventurer 2. So let me give you the rundown. It sees you playing as this kid Riley, who, for story reasons, is watching a bunch of old VHS tapes of this show known as Amanda the Adventurer. It's very clearly inspired by Dora the Explorer, and it features primitive 3D from like 2000 and older. Think VeggieTales or maybe JJ the Jet Plane. And while at first this might seem like just a harmless little kid show, there's clearly something a lot more cursed and sinister afoot here, and that's all I'm going to say about the story. Amanda the Adventurer 2 is all about the mystery and world building, and I think it does an excellent job at both of those. I think the story is actually really great in this game. It really plays off the first game. It very much is a sequel. The first game is required reading, but man, I was hooked when it came to this game from the moment I booted it up to when I finally closed it. This game takes some crazy twists and turns, and while it's not as conclusive as I would have liked, the story and world building really was something else. This game kind of lived rent-free in my head for a few days after I finished it. I was still thinking about it. I even listened to a few theory videos because it really was actually that good. And if you're going to play this game, you're absolutely playing it for the story and the world building. Something you're probably not playing it for is the gameplay. The gameplay is rather basic. It plays more like an adventure game. You walk around this library just solving puzzles and interacting with the environment. And I won't lie to you, these puzzles, they're not great. They're overly complex, kind of obtuse, and in some cases are rather tedious to figure out or solve. I know that the developers addressed at least one of the puzzles towards the beginning of the game because it was just way too obtuse for the beginning of the game. But even with that, this is one of those games that you're really going to want to play with a walkthrough. I very much do recommend a walkthrough, otherwise you're going to be here for many, many hours. But if you can look past that, you have one of the most intriguing stories of any game in 2024. I also love how this game looks. It just has this really cozy, early 3D look that I'm incredibly nostalgic for. This game, it really hit me in the feels, and I'm not afraid to admit it. If you're looking for a very different type of indie horror game, this very well might be the game for you. So from one horror game to the next, what can I say? I like horror games. We have the Outlast Trials. While this one might have initially released into early access in 2023, it hit 1.0 in 2024, and that's when I played this game. Now, I actually like the Outlast series, so I was really intrigued to see how they would handle multiplayer, and after playing through all of the trials with two of my buddies, I gotta say, I actually enjoy this game. It's definitely got some issues, but for the most part, it's a scary, engaging, cooperative experience. When it comes to actually playing this game, it does play very similar to the other Outlast games. There's just other people that have joined you now. The premise of the game is pretty horrifying. You're forced to partake in these awful trials and experiments where you do wonderful things like torturing people, electrocuting them, chopping off body parts, feeding bleach to children. I'm not even kidding. Just some sick, twisted, fucked up shit, man. So while you're trying to complete these trials, usually you have to interact with the environment in a certain way. You have to go find objects and bring them somewhere else. And of course, you're being hunted down by these crazies like the taint tickler, the ball breaker, and this crazy woman who is also after your testes. And you can't fight back in this game. Yeah, you can get like a little thing to stun them temporarily, but for the most part, you're running away and hiding from them like the other Outlast games. And I'll just immediately say, if you're somebody who doesn't like the hide and seek gameplay of Outlast, you're probably not going to like the gameplay here since it is so similar. But now you're hiding with your friends. The gameplay actually does have a little bit more depth than the other games. There is an inventory system and you're managing more than just your camera battery. You even get a perk that you get to equip. But on top of this, there actually is a good amount of trials to go through in this game. It took me around 10 hours to complete all of the trials, and while not all of them are winners, there are actually some pretty good ones in here. Except the final one. The final trial is just fucking terrible in this game, and you have to do it solo also. This is the only trial I played solo. I played entirely in co-op, and I was having a good time for the most part. I will say it did start to get repetitive towards the end, and you realize very quickly why the Outlast games are only 5 to 6 hours long. But we did have arm wrestling to break up the monotony, and I'm not gonna lie, the arm wrestling might be the best part of this game. It is like the best arm wrestling of any video game. It was way too much fun, and I put way too much time into the arm wrestling. The shit was hilarious. But all in all, I think this is a good game. Sure, it starts to wear out its welcome and get stale, but I had enough fun overall with it that I could recommend the game, especially if you're looking for a cooperative horror experience and you're done with like Phasmophobia, or maybe you want a little break from Lethal Company. So here we have Metal Slug Tactics. Now when I first saw this one, I wasn't really sure what to make of it. If you don't remember Metal Slug, or maybe you're too young to remember Metal Slug, it is the classic run and gun series, where you move left to right blasting everything in sight. So when they announced a tactical strategy game in the vein of XCOM, yeah, I really didn't know what to think, but I decided I was going to give it a chance, and after playing through it, I gotta say, it's actually a pretty good tactics game. It's no XCOM 2 or FF Tactics, but it's a fun little tactical game that I could recommend to fans of the genre and if you like Metal Slug. The game's structure is actually pretty interesting. It's a roguelike structure where it takes about an hour to do a run, and the game wants you to play through it multiple times with all the different characters. It's around the length of a normal Metal Slug game, but the game has a few roguelike elements like what stage you're going to do next, but most of the stages play pretty similar in this game where you pretty much just have to wipe out all of the enemies. Sometimes you just gotta wipe out specific targets, other times it's all of the enemies, sometimes you have to defend an area, and sometimes you really just gotta hold out. Either way, bring on the tactical gameplay, and I gotta say it actually is pretty good here. The interface is nice, it's very quick and smooth, and it's a solid tactics game. Something this game does to set it apart from any other tactics game is it really relies on the run and gun nature of Metal Slug. And what that equates to is you moving your characters all around the map every single turn. You really want them running all over the place. You don't want to just hole them up in one spot or have them stuck behind cover camping. The more you have them move, the less damage they'll take and the likelier chance they'll dodge attacks entirely. And this actually creates some really unique gameplay. It had me resorting to strategies that I would never do in like any other tactics game, but out here I was doing them left and right, having my characters run all across the map. And I was having a good time also. All of these characters are very different from each other, having a ton of different abilities, strengths, weaknesses, etc. And it's worth trying as many of them as you can. It really helps the variety out since there isn't a ton of it when it comes to these missions, environments, or boss fights. But hey, at least the game absolutely looks like a Metal Slug game. I love how this game looks, the sprites are great, and the music is just fantastic in this game. There's also a ton of fan service. Metal Slug enthusiasts should totally try this game out. Like, there is fan service to basically every Metal Slug game here, and I was really glad to see a lot of old forgotten characters show up. But even if you're not a fan of Metal Slug and just like tactics games, I think you're gonna enjoy this one. So here we have Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, and I'm sure it will disappoint some people that I have it this low on the list, but let me try to explain at least. I'll just immediately say I'm not the world's biggest Dragon Ball fan. I haven't sat down and watched all of Dragon Ball or Dragon Ball Z or Super or any of those. I've seen clips here and there, I've seen a few episodes, and I've played a bunch of games, but I wouldn't say I'm the most well-versed Dragon Ball fan. And so when this game does a bunch of fan service or little references to episodes, lines, animations, etc., I'm usually not picking it up because I just don't know the source material well enough, but I still wanted to try the game and give it a fair shot. And I still think it is a decent game, but I didn't fall head over heels with it like several other people have. So it is a 3D Dragon Ball fighting game. If you don't know how any of these games play, well, these games get pretty freaking crazy. Lots of big moves, teleporting, and plenty of projectile spamming. These fights are absolutely all over the place. They are the crazy kind of chaotic. They don't even try to be balanced, and more often than not, you'll find yourself button mashing. There is actually a lot of techniques in this game, and I really did have to play through the entire tutorial to fully understand the fighting system, and that's because it's just so wildly different from legit any other fighting game. I haven't played any other fighting game that is anything like this outside of other Dragon Ball games, and this shit can just go absolutely crazy. But I'm not gonna lie, sometimes it actually does get really fun when you're just beating the shit out of someone, sending them flying across the map, teleporting all over the place like you're Shadow the Hedgehog, that bitch ass motherfucker who pissed on my wife.
Shadow the Hedgehog's a bitch ass motherfucker. He pissed on my fucking wife.
The fighting can get pretty out of control, and if you're going up against somebody who even kinda knows what they're doing, they're gonna absolutely wipe the floor with you no matter which character they are. But some characters are clearly better than others. They don't even try to hide the fact that it's wildly unbalanced. And when it comes to the character roster, this is crazy. This is like the biggest character roster I've ever seen from a fighting game. 100+ characters, tons and tons of different versions of Goku and Vegeta, and none of them are big fans of the government. Yeah, the roster goes crazy. It also has a good amount of modes to it. There's a story mode, there's what if battles, there's challenges, online multiplayer, there's local, but the local multiplayer kinda sucks. There's a bunch of unlockables, and I think if you're a big fan of Dragon Ball, you're probably gonna like this game. You're certainly gonna like how it looks. I mean, this is a great looking game. Nobody's gonna deny that. So then why is this game only at the number 41 spot? While I did enjoy the fighting and the story mode and all the content, I didn't love it. I just thought it was good. And again, maybe it's because I'm not a huge Dragon Ball fan, but I just thought this one was pretty good. So at the number 40 spot, yes, we're only at number 40, we have Grand Blue Fantasy Relink. This one came out earlier in the year, and I feel like it really got lost in the shuffle. It's an action RPG set in the world of Grand Blue Fantasy, the mobile gacha game. I've never played the gacha, so I was going into this one pretty blind. But after going all the way through it, yeah, I think this one is actually pretty decent. When it comes to the story and setup of this game, they really just kind of throw you into it. It's clearly like the middle of our main character's adventure. You don't see their origins or how they all got together. Everyone's just together and they go on an adventure, and that's all I will say. I didn't really care for the story and characters in this game. Maybe it's because I'm not familiar with the source material here either, but I was just having a hard time getting invested into really any aspect of the story. But it's okay, there's more to this game than the story. It is a video game after all. You actually get to play the video game, and I gotta say it actually plays pretty nice. It is an action RPG where you can select between a number of different characters as you take on a variety of enemies, quests, and even some really daunting bosses. The structure of this game is pretty weird. When you first start the game, it feels like a more traditional action RPG where you're just kind of going from area to area, taking on a bunch of enemies, the occasional boss, maybe some side quests show up, but it's all very linear. But once you beat the main story, you unlock the real game where it actually becomes multiplayer, and it's more like Monster Hunter where you take on these giant bosses. A majority of the game is combat, so I'm happy to report that the combat is actually pretty good in this game. It feels really nice for the most part. I like how different all of the characters feel, and they all have some really unique movesets. No two characters play the same, which is really nice. It also just feels really smooth. It's kind of hard to describe, but if you've played it, you know exactly what I mean. And while taking on the normal enemies is cool enough, the best part of the combat is when you take on one of these gargantuan bosses and you're chipping away at his health like it's an MMO style boss or something, and you're on a boss fight for 10 to 15 minutes. Some of these fights can actually get pretty intense, and the game can even be challenging from time to time. But I found the combat actually quite enjoyable. I also thought the presentation was really great. This is just a good looking game all around, and the music's not bad either. It's a shame this game didn't get as much coverage as I think it deserves. I think the marketing really didn't help it, and it's just not super obvious what kind of game this is. Like, yes, it is a single player action RPG, but it's also a co-op Monster Hunter style game. Yeah, it's just not super clear, but I guess that's what happens when your game is in development hell for like 6+ years. I'm just happy it came out, and I'm happy that it's any good at all. And this is one game I'd like to put a little bit more time into in 2025. So from one action JRPG to another, here we have Visions of Mana. This is the latest in the long-running Mana franchise. This is actually the very first Mana game I've ever played. I've never tried Secret of Mana, Trials of Mana, or any of the remakes, so I was excited to give this one a try, and while I didn't absolutely fall in love with it, I enjoyed it for the most part. I will say this game very much goes for that classic 90s JRPG aesthetic and story. The story's pretty basic here, about the mana tree, some chosen ones, yada yada yada. Unfortunately, I didn't think the story was all that exciting, and as the game went on longer and longer, I found myself becoming more and more indifferent with it. But it wasn't terrible, just a little boring. When it comes to the presentation, things are a lot better. This is a great looking game. I love how it looks. The character models are great. The environments are awesome. Like, the colors really just pop in this game. And I think it just looks excellent through and through. And when it comes to the gameplay, I think it's pretty good also. Most of the gameplay obviously is combat, and I think the combat is actually nice in this game. It doesn't have an ocean's worth of depth here, but it's engaging enough to keep me hooked. The combat is relatively satisfying. There's a bunch of different enemies. Some of them are really cute, some of them are really not, and you get a bunch of different jobs to equip your characters with. When you change your character's class, not only do their clothes change, but their abilities, strengths, weaknesses, etc. change as well, and it was kind of fun trying out all of these jobs on all the different characters and customizing my team in that sense. All of the characters do play slightly differently regardless of which class they have equipped, so at least the combat never really got stale for me. But I also didn't do every single side quest in this game imaginable. This game doesn't have an open world, rather it has open zones where you can freely explore and do some side quests, but it's not this big interconnected world. I gotta say though, the side quests in Visions of Mana unfortunately aren't very good. They're really just generic, forgettable, cookie cutter side quests you could get in really any other RPG, but the main story is more than long enough, taking around 30 hours to beat, and I found it pretty engaging from start to finish. It's rather chill. While this isn't the best JRPG of 2024, I think it's one of the better ones, and I didn't really see anybody talking about this game outside of some JRPG circles I'm in. And that's a shame because I think it is a good one. It's one of the prettiest games of 2024 at least. From the prettiest to maybe the ugliest game of 2024, here we have Slitterhead. This is easily the weirdest game on the entire list, and just generally one of the weirdest games I have played in recent memory. I don't even really know where to start with this one. So it takes place in this not generic city, and it sees you playing as this spirit. This spirit can possess people and give them special abilities, and it's up to this spirit to take out all of these hideous, crazy, ugly, straight up monstrosities known as the Slitterheads. That's all I'm going to say for the plot. There is a lot more to this. A few other characters come in, and shit certainly gets a lot more complicated, but it also gets way more confusing. The story in Slitterhead is just kinda nonsensical. It's told out of order, and I wouldn't blame you if you needed a guide just to understand the basic premise of this game. Okay, aside from that, when it comes to actually playing Slitterhead, yes, you play as this spirit, you can possess humans and take total control over them, and your goal is to take out the Slitterheads. There are some humans known as rarities, and these ones possess even more special abilities, and these will be who you're mostly playing as, and who will be fighting the Slitterheads. If you're not fighting the Slitterheads, you're either chasing one down or you're investigating an area to try to find the Slitterhead. Now, combat in this game, it's pretty rough. It can be clunky, unrefined, and the moment you're fighting more than one enemy, it kinda just shits the bed. But I wouldn't say it's bad. When you're taking on a Slitterhead one-on-one, I think the combat is actually pretty decent, and dare I say it, even satisfying at times. For the most part, I actually enjoyed the combat and the gameplay in general. I really like that this game, it tried to do something different. It's weird, it's quirky, and there's really no other game like it, and I can always appreciate when a game is trying to do something different. Yeah, it certainly could have been better, it could have been a lot more refined, and the presentation could have been a hell of a lot better, like what even is this art style? But I actually like this one. Maybe it's a bit of a smoldering hot take. I've got this above Visions of Mana, Sparking Zero, and Grand Blue Fantasy Relink, but I had more fun with this one. I was more intrigued, and I actually really wanted to see what was going to happen. I wanted to see just how much crazier this game could get, and oh yeah, it gets crazy. I was not disappointed. It's rough around the edges, it does have some issues, but if you're looking for a game that does not give a damn about modern game standards and it really is just trying to do its own thing, maybe check this one out. I am certain in the future it's going to become a cult classic. So here we have Mario & Luigi Brother Shit. Now, I like the Mario & Luigi series. I have a lot of fond memories with Superstar Saga and Bowser's Inside Story, but I thought this series was done, especially without Alpha Dream, so I was shocked to see that there was a new one. But lo and behold, we got another one, and after playing a good amount of it, I gotta say, I think it is pretty good, but I didn't go absolutely bananas for it like I did with, say, Bowser's Inside Story. So the premise is pretty simple in this one. Mario and Luigi are just chilling one day when they end up in some other world, and after talking to some of the local residents, they take it upon themselves to fix this world and bring it back together. So they get on this ship that may or may not be an island at the same time, and they go from island to island to bring everything together. That may have been a reductive plot summary, but that's pretty much what it is. When it comes to the story in this game, I think it's just alright. I didn't find it particularly captivating. I like the world, I like some of these characters, but I didn't find it super engaging. I thought it was just good and not great. Something I did like was the presentation. I really loved the colors of this game. Everything pops, and yeah, it kind of feels like they're going for the movie aesthetic to a certain degree, but I like how the game looks. When it comes to the gameplay, it really is a Mario and Luigi game, but now on an HD console where Mario's the A button, Luigi's the B button, they have their hammers, they can jump on things, they get a bunch of special abilities, you'll investigate some areas, help some locals out, and get into plenty, and I mean plenty of combat. I think the combat in this game is good, but it takes a while to really get going. When you start it, it's very basic. You really are just like jumping on enemies and using hammers, but the more you play, the more abilities and tactics you get for these fights, and the enemies become more and more interesting, and they have different strategies of their own. Really, that's just kind of an issue with the game in general. The pacing is rather glacial. It feels like it takes forever for anything to happen in this game, from the story to the movement to the combat. This game really takes its sweet ass time, and it stretches everything out. This is a 30 to 40 hour RPG with no side quests, and it really didn't need to be that long. It honestly feels unnecessarily long, and that's why I still haven't finished it, because it is so long. But it is actually a good game. It's just a very slow good game. It looks nice, it plays nice, the music is fantastic, and I've enjoyed my time with it. I just wish it wrapped up a little sooner. I know that might seem like a silly complaint, but if you've played this game, you know exactly what I'm talking about, and I think that's why IGN hated it as well. Still, if you're looking for a good long JRPG that features Mario and isn't a remake, this one might be worth checking out. I would recommend a few other Mario and Luigi games above this, but this is still a good game. So here we have Super Monkey Ball Banana Rumble. Now, I am a die-hard Monkey Ball fanatic. I love Monkey Ball 1 and 2 on the GameCube. They're some of my favorite games ever, but I've consistently been disappointed in this franchise for the last 15 years. But I gotta say, Banana Rumble is actually a good game. Not only is it a good game, it's probably the best Monkey Ball game we've had really since the GameCube. It's also not a rehash or a remake or a remaster or anything like that. It actually does try to do something new and different. Something that this series has consistently messed up on since the GameCube games is the physics and controls, but I'm happy to report it's actually pretty good in this game. Controlling the monkeys feels nice, the stages are actually designed around these new physics, and while it's not as tight and responsive as the original two games, I think it's actually pretty good for the most part. There isn't a bunch of stupid gimmicks that show up here either. There is this like dash ability, but you don't have to use this. Most levels don't require it, and it doesn't totally compromise the stage design either. The stages are actually pretty good in this game. I had fun going through just about all of them, and there are plenty of challenging ones, especially towards the end of the game. Okay, so they did a pretty good job on the physics, the controls, and the gameplay in general, but what modes are there? There is a story mode in this game. There's an actual story that centers around the Chaos Emeralds, Infinity Stones, I don't know, there's a bunch of shiny rocks here, and that's what it's all about. The story's pretty whatever, but it sees you going through all of the stages in the game. At least you get to customize your monkey. You can put a funny hat on them, a silly shirt, or plenty of other accessories. I don't know, I kind of like this, I'm not gonna lie. But outside of that, you can play the stages individually. There's some mini games that are pretty decent, and then we have the multiplayer. The multiplayer is actually pretty good in this game. There is a good amount of online multiplayer, but the local co-op is actually really good, where you can play on the stage together. It's way better than that remake that came out a few years ago, and I've actually had some fun with the multiplayer, something I can't say about many other Monkey Ball games. At this point, I'm just kind of surprised that I have fun with any Monkey Ball game that isn't on the GameCube, but here we are. I actually like the game. If you're somebody who remembers the old GameCube games, or maybe you've always wanted to try a Monkey Ball game, this is a good one to try. I don't know how it got so difficult to make a game about monkeys rolling around in balls fun, but it seems like the bad streak is finally over and we have a good Monkey Ball game. So in the number 35 spot, we have Sandland. If you forgot about this one, let me remind you what this is. This was actually put out by Bandai Namco and is essentially an adaptation of the manga, complete with the late great Akira Toriyama art style. And you know what? This is a great looking game. I love the art style. I love how the characters look. The animation is good. The environments look nice. It's a pretty good looking game. But what exactly is this game about again? So it takes place in Sandland, an apocalyptic desert wasteland where there's just no water anywhere. and it stars our main character Beelzebub, son of the Demon King who goes looking for water with 2 other individuals. The story is actually pretty good in this game. It's easily the best part of Sandland. While it starts out simple enough, eventually it takes a few twists and turns and the story just completely changes by the second half, and I was all for it. I was totally intrigued and I couldn't wait to see what was going to happen next. It was easily the best aspect of this entire game. The characters are incredibly likable, the world building is actually very well done, and I genuinely couldn't predict what was going to happen next. But when it comes to the gameplay, I got a little less praise for it. It's an open world action RPG mixed in with vehicular combat. You're put in this huge open world that is the Sandland, a giant Mad Max style desert, and there's a bunch of different vehicles to control in this game. Most of the time though you'll be in this tank, but there's some other vehicles like a bike, a hovercraft, and even more that I don't want to spoil. All of the vehicles are very different from each other and they all are different when it comes to how they perform in combat. But like I said, a majority of the game is spent in this tank, and the tank gameplay, it's pretty decent. It doesn't have a ton of depth, but I feel like it's so rare that we actually get tank combat gameplay that this feels fresh just by default. When you're outside of the vehicles, it's a pretty standard beat 'em up where Beelzebub can really kick some serious ass. Of course, there's some RPG aspects. You get to upgrade your vehicles, level up your characters, and these are all well and good, but I wouldn't say it's anything you haven't seen before. There's also some side quests in this open world, and these unfortunately are pretty generic. The open world in general isn't the most exciting, but it is also a big flat desert, so what did you expect? The game also has a few sequences that I didn't really care much for, like everybody's favorite, forced stealth sequences in a non-stealth game. But these weren't a deal breaker by any means. I don't think the gameplay is like phenomenal in this game, but it's decent enough. So combine that with the really good story and presentation, and yeah, I think Sandland is actually a good game. And if you're somebody who's wanted to check this franchise out, or maybe you're looking for a vehicular combat game, this might be the game to get. It's probably pretty cheap now. So here we have the Plucky Squire. Now when I first saw this game, like everybody else, I was immediately mesmerized. The presentation is just phenomenal in this game. While it starts out in this storybook format, which already looks really good, eventually you actually leave the storybook and the game moves to 3D, and as you play through the game it actually changes art styles several different times. The presentation through and through is just amazing in this game. The story's pretty cool also. It's about our man Jot, the Plucky Squire, who goes on a pretty crazy fourth wall breaking adventure. The writing in this game is pretty humorous. They know that they're in a storybook. They have no problem, again, just breaking the fourth wall, being rather meta, and outside of a few moments it is rather lighthearted. It's not going to win any awards, but it made me smile, and I could really say the same about the gameplay. It's a mix of a few different gameplay styles. When you're in the storybook, it plays more like classic Zelda, you know, like A Link to the Past or maybe even Zelda 2, where you're going through dungeons, you're solving puzzles, and getting into really basic combat. But once you leave the storybook, it becomes more of a 3D platformer. There's some stealth sections in there. There's a few other genres that show up, like where it becomes a beat 'em up or a shmup, and even more that I don't want to spoil. There certainly is a lot of variety when it comes to the gameplay. Is it all amazing? Yes and no. Some areas are clearly better than others, but for the most part I found it all to be rather entertaining. I will say though, the game really does hold your hand. Like, they do not want you to be stuck at any puzzle in this game. They will tell you just straight up the solution to everything, and I know the developers released a new game mode that doesn't do this, but I'm not going to act like the puzzles were anything all that complex to begin with. They're rather simple, but they do make you think outside of the box a few times, so that is pretty cool. I think this game is good, but I didn't go cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs over it, if you know what I'm saying. The game was also pretty buggy, especially in the second half, and I feel at times the game could use a little bit more polish overall, but I still thought it was good, and if this presentation has intrigued you, oh, it's absolutely worth checking out. So here we have one of the biggest hidden gems of the entire year. It is the game Skim. So what exactly is this game? It's a 3D platformer that sees you playing as this little blob fella, and you can only jump from shadow to shadow. It's essentially The Floor is Lava, the video game. You really can only move across the shadows. You can also manipulate the environment to a certain extent, but the core gameplay really is jumping from shadow to shadow. So yeah, as a 3D platformer, it is rather simplistic. You don't have this crazy moveset, and every level is incredibly linear. It's all about going from point A to B, but I actually really like this game. The game is rather creative with its level design. All of the environments are very different from one another. The game looks incredible. I love how this game looks, and the soundtrack is really great. Sure, it's not the most involved or in-depth 3D platformer that you'll play this year, but it was just a really fun, chill little time. It's like 4 to 5 hours, the pacing is really great, and I thought it was a really great break in the action from all the other crazy games that I'm currently playing through. It might only have as much depth as the shadows that show up in this game, but if you're looking for just a chill 3D platformer that you can just kill a few hours on, you don't really got to pay a ton of attention to, this totally might be the game for you. At the very least, the soundtrack is worth listening to. It's just very calming. And I didn't see like anybody talking about this game at all, so I'll talk about it and say that I thought it was actually pretty good. So here we got a game that I just love talking about, and that is Arzette the Jewel of Fairmore. Like Skim, I didn't see a lot of people talking about this one outside of a very specific community, which I'll get into momentarily. So this game asks the question that I doubt anybody was actually asking: what if we made a game in the style of the Zelda CDI games, but we actually made it well? And what if we kept the art style and graphics as retro as those CDI games? Well, that's basically what this game is. It is a 2D platformer with some basic Metroidvania elements and some puzzle solving, which is actually how the Zelda CDI games played. This time though, it's good. The game controls well, it feels nice to play, the combat is decent, the hit detection's well done, the game's not stupidly obtuse with its puzzles, the Metroidvania elements are well implemented, the level design is actually good, the game has a little bit of challenge to it, there's even some side quests you get to do, so there's replayability, and on top of that, the game looks very, and I mean very similar to those old CDI games. I love the art style to this game. I love the art style to the CDI games. I grew up watching YouTube Poop, which was really popular in the mid to late 2000s and early 2010s. It was essentially just shitposts, but oftentimes they made fun of the Zelda CDI cutscenes. They also made fun of Hotel Mario. And that's because those cutscenes are like legendarily terrible. So for Arzette, they basically recreated them with Arzette and a new cast of characters. I love the cutscenes in this game. They are so goofy, stupid, hammy, and all over the place. Some of these characters are just absurdly ugly. I love the animation. They absolutely nailed it in that sense. It hit me right in the feels. The one community that I've seen talking about Arzette is the YouTube Poop community. And you know what? That's probably the ideal target, is people like me who grew up watching YouTube Poop, and I really enjoy the game. The gameplay isn't anything revolutionary and it's not going to rock your cock off, but I think it's a good 2D platformer with a lot of heart, soul, and some really amazing cutscenes. Oh, and the soundtrack is like killer in this game. The soundtrack, really well done. I highly, highly recommend this game to anybody that remembers YouTube Poop, or if you're looking for just a pretty decent 2D platformer with some Metroidvania elements, this might be one to check out. So here we have probably the most forgotten remake of 2024, the Mario vs. Donkey Kong remake. Yeah, they actually remade the original Mario vs. DK, the Game Boy Advance classic. And I gotta say, this is a pretty good remake. It's easily the definitive way to play this game now as well. While the Mario vs. Donkey Kong series has had plenty of ups and downs, I've always considered this original game to be pretty good. It's arguably the best game in the entire series. It's also the most different from the rest of the series. You actually get to play as Mario here, not the minis, and it's a puzzle platformer instead of a straight up puzzle game. When it comes to the story, it's pretty basic. Like the title implies, it's Mario up against DK. So yes, to go back to how this game plays, it is a puzzle platformer. What does that mean? Well, you're not going through these big sprawling levels moving at the speed of sound or anything like that. You're going through these very short, small levels where you actually have to think about where you want Mario to go. You have to utilize his moveset to the fullest, and you will have to solve some puzzles. His moveset is actually pretty different from most Mario games, and the game has a much slower pace to it overall, but I actually had a pretty good time playing through this game. I've always liked the slower pace, and I've always appreciated that it's a different type of 2D platformer, even for the Mario series. So this remake actually adds a number of extra levels that are actually pretty good as well, on top of just looking, controlling, and sounding a hell of a lot better than a Game Boy Advance. Yes, it does remove the point system from the original game, but I never thought that actually added much to the overall experience. The game actually looks really good. It's got a nice art style, the character models are updated, and there's some nice environments here. The music is also really great, and I found myself listening to the soundtrack all year. While this isn't the greatest 2D platformer or even the best Mario remake that came out this year, I still think this was a good one. And if you're somebody who's always been curious about the Mario vs. Donkey Kong series, or maybe you tried one of the later ones, I think you're going to enjoy this one. I've always preferred the original over all the sequels with the minis, so at the very least, it's nice to see that they remade, the right one. Alright, we're officially halfway there at the number 30 spot, and I have the Alone in the Dark reboot. Now I know that this game wasn't the most well received, and I'm sure some people will be scratching their head that I have it even as high as I do on this list, but I genuinely really did enjoy the Alone in the Dark reboot. Sure, it is a bit rough around the edges, and it could be better in a few aspects, but I really did enjoy my time with it. So it is a total reimagining of that original game, with Emily Hartwood and Edward Carnby going to a mysterious mansion in the swamps as they look for Emily's uncle who has disappeared. I actually really like the story to this game. It's got a lot of mystery and intrigue, and it's got a few plot twists that even I didn't see coming. There's also some pretty decent characters here. Something this game absolutely excels in is the atmosphere and vibe. I think they did a great job with the mood in this game, and I was really picking up what this game was putting down. And when it comes to the gameplay, it's a classic survival horror game. You gotta remember, Alone in the Dark has been around for like ever, even longer than Resident Evil, so we're really going back to the basics here. You're exploring this spooky mansion, examining the environment, picking items up, using them with other items or the environment, solving some puzzles, getting scared, getting into some scuffles with these creatures, and of course there's a few set pieces here and there. I actually had a pretty good time exploring the mansion. I think the game has a great sense of exploration. I think the puzzles are really well done. They're not overly complex, and it doesn't feel like they're crazy obtuse, but it doesn't feel like they were made for a small child either. There's a good balance here. I think the pacing is also very well done. And then we have the combat. The combat, it's just okay in this game. While the gunplay is decent enough, the melee combat, oof, yeah, that's pretty rough. But it's nothing too janky. It's not even as clunky as Slitterhead. Something this reimagining keeps from the original is that they want you to play through the game twice, once as Edward and once as Emily, and there actually are a few different cutscenes and sequences, so I would recommend playing through the game twice, especially if you enjoyed it enough to finish it in the first place. The game isn't super long. I think it took me about 10 hours to finish it with both characters, and yeah, I really did like it. The presentation isn't exactly the most up to snuff, but you also got to remember this is very clearly a AA game, and unfortunately it clearly sold like crap because Embracer shut the studio down, so we'll probably never get a sequel. But if you're looking for a good underrated horror game, I've been recommending this game for months now, and I will continue recommending it. While it's not the most innovative or as refined as, say, the Resident Evil remakes, I still really liked it. So in the number 29 spot, we have easily the best racing game of 2024, Victory Heat Rally. Now then, what do you mean you've never heard of Victory Heat Rally? Let me tell you all about it. This game is so much fun. It is a throwback to older arcade racing games. You know, the ones that don't have an ounce of realism. They let you pull off these huge drifts. They let you go super fast. There's all these vibrant, fun colors. And there's not a single licensed car or microtransaction in sight. You know, the good old days. Alright, but funny little jabs aside, this is actually a really great driving game. It feels really nice. The drifting feels satisfying. You get a great sense of speed here. The physics are well done, and it controls really well. Something else that is in this game's favor is that the track design is actually really well done also. This game wants you to go fast. There's huge turns where you can just build a really powerful drift up. There's big jumps. There's some nice straightaways. I really like the track design here. And no two tracks felt the same, which is not something I can say about most racing games. When it comes to this game's content, I think it's good in that aspect as well. You have a story mode that is not only incredibly varied, but it also doesn't wear out its welcome. With a nice 4 to 5 hour length, there's some time trials, there's multiplayer, and you even get to customize your vehicles. Well, you get to customize the color. At least you get to change something. Something that I like about the story mode is that it isn't just race after race after race. There actually is different types of events, like drifting challenges, challenges where you gotta stay in the cones. There's even some boss fights that show up where it's more like Tokyo Extreme Racer. And it all just leads to a fun, varied playthrough. On top of this, the game looks great. I love the vibrant colors. I love the aesthetic and art style. The music is also pretty nice. They really nailed that. This game goes for such a fun vibe, and I was really eating that shit up, especially because 2024 was a real drought for good racing games. It felt like there was basically no good racing games. In this game, it was a real diamond in the rough. If you're somebody who likes racing games, legit any type of racing game, I think you're gonna enjoy this one. Alright, so here we have a game I also love talking about, 420 Blaze It 2 Game of the Year, Dank Dreams and Goated Memes, hashtag wow, 11 like and subscribe, Poggers Edition. Yes, that is the full name, and I will say it every single time. So if you've never heard of this game, or you've never heard me speak on it before, you might be going, is this just a shitpost? Is this just a meme? Is this even a real game? Yes, this is actually a real game. When I first saw the trailers for this, I also thought it was just a joke. I was like, oh, this is probably one of those like 5-minute meme fest. It's not even a real game. But after playing all the way through it, I can tell you, no, this is an actual full-length first-person shooter that is way better than it has any right to be. And yes, it absolutely is a meme. This is maybe the funniest game I played in 2024, and it's a real love letter, a real throwback to all of the crazy memes from the early 2010s. And if you've forgotten, or maybe you're not old enough to know the memes of the early 2010s, let me remind you, it was all about the MLG memes, the crazy hit markers, the flashing rainbow colors, the people screaming, and it was all about people using the intervention. In this game, oh, it's got all of the memes from the 2010s. When I mean all of them, I really do mean like all of the memes from 2010 to like 2016. I couldn't think of one they missed here. Even if it's got copyrighted shit like Shrek, Lightning McQueen, Teletubbies, Slippy Toad, it's all here. They found a way to get it all in. And the game genuinely had me laughing my ass off the entire time. But when it comes to actually playing this game, as you could probably tell, it is a first-person shooter, a very fast-paced first-person shooter, where you pretty much just hit marker everything in sight. And the shooting, it actually feels pretty good. Despite all of the weapons being incredibly derivative of Call of Duty and Counter-Strike, they actually do feel nice, and can even be satisfying at times. But there's more to these levels than just shooting everything in sight. There's actually plenty of set pieces. There are 11 levels in this game, and all of them are drastically different from each other. No two levels feel the same. They've all got a bunch of crazy, hilarious set pieces, and you'll be doing something different in all of them. What's even crazier is there's actually some side objectives. Yeah, there's actually some replayability here, and it's actually really fun. There is a story here, but I'd rather not spoil anything. If you're somebody who remembers the memes of the 2010s, you should buy this game immediately. This game is clearly for you. It's a trip down memory lane, and for me personally, it was a really great trip. I very much remember the memes of the 2010s, so I was eating this game up. So yeah, maybe I'm a little biased towards it, but this was unironically one of the most memorable experiences I had in 2024. So here we have Super Mario Party Jamboree, the latest in the long-running Mario Party franchise. Now, I've been playing Mario Party for almost 20 years now, and I gotta say, this is unironically one of the very best games in the entire franchise. I was actually incredibly impressed with this game. When I first saw it, I went, oh, it's a sequel to Super Mario Party? Man, that game, it wasn't really very good at all. So I actually didn't get it at release, but then one of my friends was like, oh dude, this game is super good, I'm gonna bring it over and we're gonna play it. And then yeah, I spent a number of hours playing this game, and I gotta say, it's actually the real deal. I was thoroughly impressed by this game. I think the biggest thing I gotta say is that there's a lot of content in this game. Not only is there a single player story mode, there's a ton of online multiplayer modes, dozens upon dozens of mini games. There's some new other game modes that are brand new here, like a battle royale, and then there's actually a bunch of boards. There's also a ton of characters. I was like, shit, this is like the best roster of any Mario Party game. Bowser's here, Donkey Kong, Bowser Jr., Goomba, even my man Monty Mole shows up here. It feels like outside of the Koopalings, just about every mainstay Mario character shows up, and I thought that was really cool. I really enjoyed all of the boards for this game as well. Super Mario Party had such lackluster boards, legit. All of these boards are way better than anything Super Mario Party had. There's even a few throwback boards in there that weren't in the last Mario Party game. You know it's going to be a good time when Westerland shows up, and then the minigame selection, oh, it's so good. To top it all off, the game has a delightful presentation, the soundtrack is actually pretty good, and yeah, you'll be playing this game for quite a good amount of time. There really is just a lot to this game. This is one game that I actually want to put a lot more time into in 2025, and that's because I was just enjoying it so much, but I also feel like I put enough time into it in 2024 to properly rank it, unlike say Star Wars Outlaws, which I only played a few hours of. If you're looking for a new party game to play with the family or friends, or maybe you're a longtime fan of Mario Party, check this game out immediately. You will not be disappointed. You'll be playing it for weeks on end, and it's got crazy replayability. So here we have another Crab's Treasure, which is actually one of the best Souls-likes of the entire year. If you had told me that Crab Souls, the goofy little crab game, would be as good as it is, I probably wouldn't have believed you, but here we are. It's genuinely way better than you would expect. The premise is pretty simple. You play as, well, a crab, and you're just chilling in your shell. You don't want anybody to bother you, but all of a sudden your shell gets taken, and it's up to you to try to get it back. There's obviously a lot more to this story, and I was actually really impressed by the story in this game. There's characters, motivation, a few plot twists, and it actually has a really great message to it as well. There's way more story to this game than most Souls-likes, that's what I will say. It even gets a little emotional towards the end. When it comes to actually playing this game though, it is quite different from most Souls-likes. It's different in a few areas. Sure, it has that slower, more methodical combat Souls-likes are known for, and when you die you have to go get what is essentially your souls back, but there's a few fun twists on this one. Something your character can do is put on shells, and I'm not talking about other crab shells, I'm talking about everyday objects. If it can fit on your crab, you can probably put it on soda cans, cups, rubber duckies, even keycaps for like a keyboard. There's dozens of different shells you can put on in this game, and what's really cool is not only do all of them have their own features and attributes like their durability level, but they all have special abilities as well. Each one grants your character a special ability. It might be super simple, like a little uppercut or something, but if you equip a can, you can actually roll around in the can and gain some serious speed. Something else that sets this game apart from really any other Souls-like is how much 3D platforming there is. This game takes place pretty much entirely under the ocean, and the ocean is this big, vast seascape, and they really let you explore it. These are some rather open areas. It's not an open world or anything like that. There's just a lot to see here, and even though the game is very linear, there's a lot to explore. I think this game has a great sense of exploration, and you'll be doing a lot of platforming. I'd say there's almost as much platforming as there is combat. This game really is a hybrid between a 3D platformer and a Souls-like, and it's a challenging one at that. This game actually started to kick my ass, especially towards the end, but I also found it to be pretty rewarding. There's some great set pieces, some awesome boss fights, the combat is actually very well done, and the platforming was really fun. While the game isn't exactly a looker, I really like the style that this game goes for, and the soundtrack's actually pretty good as well. If you're looking for a solid action RPG or a good Souls-like, check this game out. It's also probably the best game to ever star a crab as the main character. I'm sure someone down below will say, but what about this game? And I go, oh shoot, you're totally right. But when it comes to crab games, it doesn't really get much better than Another Crab's Treasure. So here we are at the number 25 spot. I don't know what idiot thought 60 was a great number, but yes, we're finally at the number 25 spot, and we have Dungeons of Hinterberg, one of the most underrated games of the entire year. While I did see a little bit of hype for this one right when it released, it pretty much fizzled out immediately, and that's unfortunate because I actually really like this game. I was surprised with how much I like this game. I guess the best way to describe this game would be a mix of old school 3D Zelda and Persona. I know that might sound a little reductive, but hear me out here for a second. The game takes place at this mysterious new theme park known as Hinterberg, which is located in the Austrian Alps, and it sees our main character Louisa going here to just get away from the corporate life for a few weeks. But this isn't a normal tourist spot. What makes this place famous is that there's a bunch of dungeons that have sprung up. And there's also a bunch of these weird monsters to slay. Yeah, it doesn't sound like much of a tourist spot to me, but Louisa goes here and she wants to conquer all of the dungeons and slay all of the monsters. The plot is actually surprisingly well done in this game. I really like the characters, and the dialogue is actually well written, and there's some really good themes in this game as well that really touch on some real world topics. I like the story, characters, and world building way more than I thought I would, and I could say the same for the gameplay. Like I mentioned, it's a mashup between older 3D Zelda, think like Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Twilight Princess, and then Persona 4, 5, and even 3. There's a calendar, a day-night cycle. During the day, you go off and conquer these dungeons, and then in the evening you can hang out with a number of characters, and there is a little bit of that time management mechanic that Persona is known for, you know, the life sim element. When it comes to the dungeons themselves, you're given a few different abilities depending on the area you're in, and you'll have to use those abilities along with just some basic problem solving to conquer all of these dungeons. None of the puzzles are too taxing, it doesn't ever get like crazy difficult or obtuse, but it's not a total cakewalk here either, and I actually think some of the abilities you get are really cool in this game. In between it all, there is some combat. The combat feels more like a throwback to the 360 era, it's more on the hack and slash side, but I thought it was decent enough. There's even some minor RPG elements thrown in there as well. You're not like leveling up, but there is gear to manage, as well as a few perks here and there. Yeah, this game is just a total mashup of a bunch of genres, but it all actually comes together to create a really nice experience. It's pretty chill for the most part. It doesn't ever get crazy challenging, and you probably won't have to put the critical thinking cap on, but I just found this to be a really cool experience all around. And then the presentation is fantastic. The cell shading is off the chain here. I love how this game looks. All the colors are so vibrant, everything pops, and the soundtrack is delightful. This game is a total hidden gem, and I really can't recommend it enough. I know that right now it's only on PC and Xbox, but I'm sure in the future it will come to other platforms, and then I totally think it's worth checking out. So here we have Dragon's Dogma 2. When 2024 started, this was one of my most anticipated titles of the year, and while I was a little disappointed by it, I still thought it was a pretty good game. I wouldn't say that it was substantially better than the original or one of the very best RPGs of the year, but there's a ton of upside with this game still. Like the pawn system. The pawn system is still one of the most unique systems to ever be in any kind of RPG, where you're able to create allies that will not only help you in battle, but they'll also help you while you're exploring the world, and you can actually send them online to go help other people as well. You can bring in tons of other people's pawns, and if they have world experience from somebody else they played with, they'll let you know all about it. The pawn system still is like the coolest aspect of Dragon's Dogma, and I think it's easily the most impressive aspect of this game. That or the graphics. This is a very good looking game, but it kind of ran like dog crap when it released. And I'm not just talking about on PC, it ran terribly on console as well, but I know nowadays it has been patched and the frame rate is a lot smoother. But outside of the pawns, you have this big ol' open world to explore and a main quest line to do, where it turns out you're the Arisen. You're the one that's going to save us all, but there's a false Arisen on the throne, and so it's up to you to figure out just what exactly is going on. The story and plot and how everything plays out is actually pretty similar to the original games, and it's probably the weakest aspect of this entire game in my opinion. I just had a really hard time getting invested in this story or characters. Even though there were cool cutscenes and moments, I just felt a level of apathy that got stronger and stronger the more I played this game, and by the time I was done with it, I just felt pretty indifferent. But you know what I didn't feel indifferent about? The combat. I actually really enjoy the combat of Dragon's Dogma 2. It's one of the best aspects of the entire game. It's visceral, raw, and it feels great no matter which class you're playing as. There's actually a bunch of different classes in this game, and they play vastly different from each other. You will have completely different playstyles, but something they all share in common is that they all feel really great. I definitely prefer some classes over others. I really do prefer the melee classes over the ranged ones, but they all do feel nice. The combat actually has a good amount of depth to it, and as you play the game more, you'll start seeing a bunch of different enemy variants, and you might even have to change up your tactics for a few of them. You also fight some really large enemies, and you can climb them Shadow of Colossus style. The combat can also get rather difficult. Some enemies can just wipe the floor with you, and the more times you get hit, your max health will actually go down, and the only way to get it back to normal is staying at a camp or a hotel. Something else that adds to the difficulty in this game is the quests in open world. This is not the friendliest of RPGs. There's not really much fast travel in this game. There's no quest markers telling you exactly where to go. Usually you're just given a general area and they don't spell everything out for you. You will have to figure out things on your own. What I'm trying to say is that the game doesn't hold your hand, and honestly I thought that was pretty refreshing. So many games just tell you how to do every single thing and they won't let you do anything on your own. This game, they'll let you do everything you want on your own. They'll let you go get your ass whooped by everyone. I welcome the challenge. While I didn't love the game and I wish the story was a lot better and that it made some more improvements on the original, I still thought this was a good time. So if you're looking for a good open world action RPG that tries to be different from plenty of other open world action RPGs, maybe it's the one to try. So here we have Stellar Blade. Now before this one came out, I really wasn't sure what to make of it. I felt like it could go a number of different ways, but it was published by SIE, so I did have some faith in it, and I gotta say, while the game does have some issues that could totally be ironed out in a sequel, I still think this is a good game. So the game sees you playing as Eve, this woman who's sent down to Earth from space to essentially take the Earth back from these monsters known as Natibas. There's obviously a lot more going on with this story that I don't want to spoil, but I'll be totally honest, the story is probably the weakest aspect of this entire game. I just really didn't care much for it. Eve is a decent protagonist, but I really didn't care for the rest of the cast in this game, and I found the story to be super predictable. Usually when I play through a game, I try not to make any predictions. I want to be surprised and engaged with the story and all of its plot twists, but with this one, it was pretty hard. I just found it really predictable. But to move to a positive note, we have the gameplay. This game is a mix of a hack and slash and a Souls-like. It kind of has a nice in-between, where it has plenty of Souls-like elements, but it plays much more like a traditional hack and slash. And I gotta say, the combat is actually really good in this game. Kind of like Rise of the Ronin, the combat just kind of carries this entire game. I found the combat to be immensely satisfying, and there's actually a good amount of depth. You can get a bunch of different techniques, and your moveset can expand greatly. There's also a lot of parrying and countering in this game, and man, this shit feels really good. Like, this might be the best parry of 2024, and that really is saying something. And then when you get a bunch of them in quick succession, that shit feels so good, and the sound effect is really great. The combat is crunchy, visceral, and I had a lot of fun during it. so it's a good thing that most of the game is combat. When you're not in combat, you're usually exploring around, doing some minor platforming or basic puzzle solving in these very linear areas. Sometimes it's just straight corridors, sometimes it's a more open area, but it's nothing like an open world or anything like that. The level design is very basic, forgettable, and really nothing special, sadly. It all feels like it's just kind of filler until you get to the next amazing boss fight. There are some side quests in this game, but these I also found to be rather forgettable. At the very least, the pacing is pretty good. You're moving to new areas, doing different things, and the boss fights really are great. The combat is the best aspect of Stellar Blade, and it's why you should play this game. It does look pretty good for the most part. Sometimes it looks like it has a few different art styles going on at once, but generally speaking, I think it's a good looking game. The soundtrack is also really great. If you haven't tried this one and you're looking for a solid hack and slash or maybe an action RPG, this one might be worth your time. It's either this one or this next game. So the next game we have is Black Myth Wukong, maybe the best-selling game of 2024, and yeah, I have it all the way in the number 22 spot. Don't get it twisted, I like Black Myth Wukong. I think it's a good game. But I didn't think it was fantastic, and honestly I had a pretty hard time choosing between Stellar Blade and Black Myth Wukong. I might be just going with Black Myth Wukong because of recency bias. But hey, we can all agree that they're both good games. So this game is inspired by the classic Chinese novel Journey to the West, and it follows this monkey based on the legendary Sun Wukong. Now, I don't know if this is the hottest take, but I didn't think the story to this game was very good at all. Not only did it seem low-key nonsensical and all over the place, but I really just had a hard time caring about anything that was going on. I thought the actual world to the game was really interesting and different from just about any other game I've played, but the actual story itself and the characters, I had a really hard time giving a shit about anything that was going on. Maybe that seems a bit hypercritical, so I'll move on to something that is really great in this game, and that is the presentation. This is one of the best looking games of the entire year. Like, this is a real looker of a game. I don't have some crazy fancy PC, but even without it, this game just looked phenomenal. The character models, the environments, the lighting, it all looked fantastic in this game, and the monster design is really cool. Visually speaking, the game is a 10 out of 10, but when it comes to the actual gameplay, like Stellar Blade, it's a mix of a Souls-like and a hack and slash. I struggle to call this game an actual Souls-like. Yes, it has plenty of elements like a stamina bar, but it really does feel more like an actual hack and slash. And like Stellar Blade, they want you to be really aggressive in this game. You really want to be all over your enemies. But there's actually a decent amount of depth to this combat thanks to the different stances. I'm not going to say there's as much depth as say Rise of the Ronin or Devil May Cry 5, but I can appreciate that there was at least a little depth here. It's not just a straight button masher. And honestly, if you're button mashing, you're going to get your ass whooped in this game. While it doesn't start out super difficult, it has a pretty steep difficulty curve, especially in the second half. So the combat is rather good, but is there anything else to this game? Yeah, there are a few moments for sure where you're not in combat. I'd say like 80 to 85% of the game though is combat, specifically boss fights. This game feels more like a boss rush than anything else, and that's fine with me. This game has so many cool boss fights. Like, it is kind of shocking how many cool boss fights there are in this game, but outside of all the fighting, you do get to explore these very linear areas, and I'm gonna be real, the level design isn't very good in this game. It doesn't do anything you haven't seen before. There's a bunch of invisible barriers everywhere, and the game has a terrible sense of exploration. It rarely ever rewards you if you go off the beaten path, and the side quests aren't very good in this game either. I'd say the level design is like on par, if not a little worse than Stellar Blades, but it's all good because the boss fights and the combat really are the star of the show here. The boss fights, some of the coolest you'll ever find in a video game. If you haven't tried Black Myth Wukong at this point and what you've seen interests you, then yeah, I think it is worth checking out. I don't think it's a phenomenal video game, but I still think it is a good one. Alright, so here we have the awesome Stalker 2 Heart of Chernobyl. Now, this is the first new Stalker game in over 15 years, and I really wasn't sure what they were going to do for Stalker. Were they going to change it? Were they going to modernize it? What does a modern day Stalker game even look like? Well, after playing this game, I'm so happy to say that they really didn't change much at all. This is a Stalker game through and through, complete with all the jank. When it comes to this game's setting and story, it sees our main man Skiff going to the anomaly zone for things. I'll just say I really don't like spoiling stories in my videos, so I'll just say he goes to the anomaly zone. If you're not sure about the zone in the Stalker games, basically it's this place where really weird shit happens. Physics defying anomalies, a bunch of mutated creatures, and a bunch of assholes running around. Yeah, it doesn't sound all that different from the Tenderloin in San Francisco. But anyway, I digress. I think the story and world is pretty decent in Stalker 2. I'm not going to act like it's an amazing story with the most deep, riveting, memorable characters, but it gets the job done. The zone itself is pretty great, and it's just as good as it's always been in the prior games. Something that also is just as good as the prior games is the atmosphere. The atmosphere of the original Stalker trilogy is kind of unparalleled, and I think Stalker 2 also has a really great atmosphere. It's not the original's atmosphere, but it still is pretty good. So what are you even doing in this game? It is an open world first person shooter with survival elements. Really, there's two big aspects to Stalker: getting into firefights and scavenging, and all of the quests in open world really are built around that. You'll get into firefights with people, creatures, anomalies. It feels like damn near everything wants to kill you in this game. The firefights are pretty visceral and quick. You die incredibly fast in this game. If an enemy gets the drop on you, you're pretty much dead, but you can also wipe them out pretty fast as well. There's actually a good amount of challenge to the combat, and the game can be rather punishing at times, but I think the shooting is actually really great in this game. All of the weapons just feel really nice. And then when it comes to the scavenging survival aspects, it's pretty basic stuff. You gotta manage your inventory, your weight, your food, health, and radiation levels. Yeah, there's plenty of radiation all over the place, and the only way to get rid of it is by drinking alcohol. However, despite being a survival game, the game has no problem giving you tons of supplies. You'll rarely ever run out of food, alcohol, or ammunition. You'll really just be managing your weight more than anything else. Getting over encumbered is so easy in this game. But hey, at least you get to manage something, and the user interface is actually good in this game. Something else that's good about this game is the presentation. This is a real looker. Like, this game looks fantastic. It runs like total dog shit on the PC, but it certainly looks nice. It's also got a big ol' open world to explore. This is easily the biggest Stalker game of them all, and honestly, it's too big. You spend way too much time running around in this game, and I just wanted to get into more firefights or scavenge shit, but it doesn't waste too much of your time. Overall, I really enjoyed Stalker 2. It felt like a fun throwback to a different era, but it also provided something new. If you're somebody who likes the older Stalker games, or you're looking for a very different type of open world game, this is one I think you should absolutely check out. But just be aware, it's going to be pretty janky and sometimes rough around the edges. Okay, so in the number 20 spot, we have Call of Duty Black Ops 6. I know it might surprise some people that I have this game as high as I do, but this is easily the best Call of Duty game in a long time. I haven't liked a COD this much since like the 360 days. It's got everything you're looking for in a Call of Duty game. It's got a good campaign with an intriguing story. It's got multiplayer that you either love at this point or you really hate, and then it actually has a really great zombies mode. The campaign is, at least in my opinion, the best campaign Call of Duty's had in forever. All of these missions were very good. They're all varied and different from each other, and I found the story to actually be rather intriguing. Taking place after Cold War, it sees a bunch of rogue CIA operatives like our man Frank Woods assembling a team to hunt down Pantheon, this new mysterious paramilitary group. The story is everything you'd be looking for in a Black Ops story: brainwashing, conspiracy theories, and a very intriguing mystery throughout. I found it to be pretty entertaining for the 5 or 6 hours that it took to complete. And again, I just love how varied this campaign was. No two missions felt alike, and it actually was pretty different from the typical Call of Duty levels where you're just blowing everything up and it's one-man army. That still absolutely is here, but it's not every single level. When it comes to the multiplayer, look, I'll just say at this point, you either like Call of Duty multiplayer or you don't, and I think it's fine, if not a little tired at this point. And then we have zombies, which I actually think is really great. I was kind of surprised with how much I enjoyed zombies. There's currently 3 maps, and all of them are actually really great. I haven't had this much fun with zombies in so long. Like, it can't just be me, right? This Call of Duty really hits different, and it hits a lot better than the last, I don't know, 10 CODs have. And that's not even an exaggeration. Something I really love about Black Ops 6 is the gunplay and the movement. It has omnidirectional movement, which feels really cool, and the guns, they just feel incredible in this game. They're satisfying, they're visceral, and above all else, it's just really fun to shoot things in this game. I know that might seem a bit simplistic to say, but hey, sometimes I'm a simple guy. I just want to shoot things and go bang bang, and Black Ops 6, it's a great game for that. At this point, everybody's got their mind made up on Call of Duty, so all I will say is if you're somebody who's a lapsed fan, maybe you've taken a few years off, this might be one that's worth checking out if you haven't already. And so here we have Helldivers 2. I know it might not seem like it nowadays, but this was one of the biggest releases of 2024, and it kind of took everybody by surprise. Well, it didn't totally take me by surprise, but I was also a little involved in the game's development. Well, anyway, Helldivers 2 is so far the only successful live service game that Sony has launched, and it showed that yes, you can actually have a good launch for a live service game. The game released with a ton of content. It wasn't broken beyond belief outside of the servers because too many people were playing it, and it actually had some fun, compelling gameplay loops. games. Yeah, over the year they didn't update the game as much as a lot of people would have hoped, but they still have been slowly updating it and adding new content here and there. What made Helldivers 2 as great as it is that you and 3 other people would get dropped onto this randomly generated planet and you'd pretty much just eviscerate everything in sight. Yeah, there were some other minor objectives you would get, but you're pretty much just annihilating everything, all in the name of democracy. The combat in Helldivers 2 is so visceral and raw, it's kinda hard to explain unless you've played the game, but all of the weapons have a certain weight to them. And when you unload into an enemy, which is either a robot or a bug, you absolutely shred them. They just get completely torn to pieces and it feels really great. You can also call down airstrikes, missiles, vehicles, etc. and everything just gets completely annihilated. It really does feel raw. Friendly fire is also on at all times, so you can totally just fuck up your buddies on accident and it will never not be hilarious when you accidentally bomb them. And as you play the game more and more, you unlock new drops, new weapons, and shit just starts to get absolutely crazy in this game. And that's when the game is at its most fun. That or when you're quickly entering Mortal Kombat style button inputs as you're constantly being attacked by enemies. The game is hectic, it's chaotic, and it's always a really great time. If you haven't tried Helldivers 2 at this point, and you're looking for a new shooter to play with your buddies, maybe give this one a shot. I can't speak for how it is solo, but when you're with friends, it's always a good time. So here we have Mullet Mad Jack, one of the most insane games released in 2024. If you haven't heard of this one, strap in, shit's about to get crazy. The game takes place in an anime-inspired retro wave future and sees you playing as Mullet Mad Jack, this really mad dude who charges into this building to go save this live streamer from a bunch of killer robots. But there's a catch. Everything he's doing is being live streamed to an audience as well, and if they deem him boring, he dies. And there's only 2 things that keeps your audience interested: killing robots and drinking soda. Your health really is tied to the audience's interest, so you'll be killing enemies as fast as possible in order to get the timer back up. But the timer can't ever go above like 9 seconds, so you're constantly on edge. Just making a mad dash through these randomly generated levels, killing everything in sight, drinking as much soda as you can, and this game is just so much fun. It starts to get really hectic, especially by the end of it. They start introducing new gimmicks, enemies, level design, etc., and they keep things really varied. While you can only hold one weapon at a time, all of these weapons feel really great. You can also upgrade them and make them better than ever. You'd be surprised which weapons end up being really good if you've upgraded them. They're all incredibly satisfying to use in the game. It really just feels awesome. This game certainly takes a bit of time to get used to. It's one of the fastest games I've ever played, but once everything comes together and it all clicks, oh, there's not much else like this game. And it's also got an amazing aesthetic. I love how this game looks. The colors are so vibrant. Everything is incredibly animated, and it goes for that classic anime aesthetic that we just don't see enough of nowadays. The soundtrack is also amazing in this game. I actually really love the soundtrack. Man, I actually just really love this game. It was just so much fucking fun. My biggest issue, outside of the boss fights being a little weak, is that it's only like 3 to 4 hours long. I wanted more from this game. Yeah, it's incredibly replayable and there's an endless mode, but man, I was just having such a great time. I didn't want it to end. If you're looking for a great first-person shooter, look no further. You got a great game here. So here we have a game I actually haven't talked to death, and that is The Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom. I was actually pretty surprised when this one got announced. I was like, wow, a brand new 2D Zelda where you actually play as Zelda? I think this is going to be really cool, and after playing through it, yeah, I think this game is great. Look, it's no Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, but I'd much rather play this than, say, Link's Awakening. And I specifically mentioned Link's Awakening because, yeah, this game looks just like the Link's Awakening remake, and I love how it looks. It has a great aesthetic. The environment looks really nice. The lighting is actually pretty great, and I like how the character models look. The frame rate was pretty suspicious in this game, though. But anyway, you actually get to play as Zelda in this game. It's up to her to save Link in the Kingdom of Hyrule using this new ability she's given known as the Tri-Rod. And that's all I'm going to say for the story, because I actually like the story in this game. It tries to do something even a little different from the other Zelda games, and they actually make Zelda a pretty badass character. I also like the world of this game. It feels very much like old Zelda, specifically 90s Zelda, and I feel like it's been such a long time since we've had a Zelda game with that kind of vibe. I was really eating this shit up. So when it comes to the gameplay, it's a bit different from the other Zeldas, even the 2D Zelda game. Instead of being given a sword and shield, she has the rod, and the rod can create echoes, which are essentially imitations of objects and monsters once she scans one in. There is a limit to how many things you can summon at once, but the more you play the game, the more things you can summon at once, and really everything is built around this. You will scan everything in, from furniture like barrels and beds to all of the classic Zelda monsters. All of this game's exploration, all of the puzzle solving, all of the dungeons, all of the combat is centered around creating echoes, and I gotta say, this is a really cool concept and I think it's executed incredibly well. It's very similar to Breath of the Wild where they want you to do dynamic problem solving using your abilities, only here it's on a 2D plane and it really is the entire game. You have this decently sized open world to explore and you can freely explore it whenever you want thanks to all of these abilities. If you get creative, you can see almost every area immediately and you'll be able to take on their foes as long as you keep summoning more and more echoes. I won't lie, the combat is probably the weakest aspect of the game. Like, it's alright, but I didn't love it. But that's alright since a majority of the game is puzzle solving and you going through these dungeons. The pacing and structure is more like classic Zelda with a unique twist thanks to the rod, and I gotta say this game was actually quite good. No, it's not one of the greatest Zelda games of all time and I wouldn't even have it in my top 10 best games of 2024, but I still really enjoyed it. It was easily my favorite Nintendo game of the year, and I think it is worth playing, especially if you love this series. So here we have Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, which was the first major release of 2024. Now, I didn't really know what to expect of this game before it came out. It was the first new console Prince of Persia game in 14 years, and it looked very different from the last Prince of Persia game. They went back to their 2D roots and it was a Metroidvania. But by the time the credits rolled, I knew that this was not only one of the best Prince of Persia games, but one of the best Ubisoft games to come out in a very long time. And it is a damn shame hearing that this game sold like ass. Ubisoft split up the development team and rejected a sequel because this game is great. So it doesn't actually see you play as the Prince of Persia, you play as Sargon, one of his elite guards. And you have to go rescue the prince after he gets kidnapped, and I'll just say there's more to this story than meets the eye. I actually quite like the story. I think Sargon's a likable character, and while the story's not the most memorable or original, I still thought it was good. But you know what's real good? The gameplay. So it is a 2D Metroidvania, but it is so much more than that. You're dropped into this just gargantuan map to explore with so many different things to see, and Sargon has a great moveset. He can move super fast, he can wall jump and climb, and as you play through the game, his moveset just gets bigger and bigger and you can explore more and more of this map. The level design is really great in this game. It is some of the best level design I've ever seen in a Metroidvania, and the sense of exploration was really high in this one. But outside of exploring, there's actually a good amount of combat in this game. I'd say like a solid third of the game is combat, so it's a good thing that it's also pretty good. This plays pretty similar to like a 2D Devil May Cry. There's actually a good amount of depth here, and all of Sargon's awesome moveset can be used in combat as well, whether you're fighting just one of the normal goons or one of the bosses. I was always having a great time with the combat. I was just having a great time with this game in general. It has a really cool feature that not enough Metroidvanias have, where you can actually take a little snapshot and place it on your gargantuan map so you know where to come back to later when you have a new ability and you can actually explore what you were trying to explore. I hope like every Metroidvania has that going forward. On top of all this, I think the game has a pretty nice art style. Sure, it's not a real looker, but I like how the game looks, and the music was half decent as well. Now, I know that there were a lot of people who skipped this game because it was in 2D and they wanted a 3D game, but all I gotta say is if you skip this game because it was in 2D, you're lost. This is a great Metroidvania and I really got no problem recommending it. It's dirt cheap now, and there's even some DLCs that have released for it. So in the number 15 spot, we have the awesome Crow Country. This is a PS1 inspired indie horror title that is without a doubt one of my favorite horror experiences of the entire year. It sees you playing as Mara Forrest as you go to this abandoned theme park known as Crow Country. As a detective, she's gone to investigate after hearing that monsters were showing up at this theme park, and that's all I'm going to say for the story. I actually really love the story of Crow Country. I think it's intriguing, it's interesting, it's got a really good hook to it, and I genuinely very much wanted to see what was going to happen. I think the game has an excellent mystery and an even better payoff. When it comes to actually playing this game, it is a classically styled survival horror game. It very much is inspired by the older Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Parasite Eve, etc. But something this game does that's very different from all of those is that it doesn't have fixed camera angles. It has a fully rotatable 360-degree camera, and the game absolutely makes use of it. I think this is actually really cool. The game is also very much inspired by PS1 games when it comes to the presentation. I love how this game looks. They totally nailed the aesthetic, vibe, mood, atmosphere, everything to do with the presentation. They killed it. The music was also great as well. But when it comes to what you're doing in the moment-to-moment gameplay, if you've played one survival horror game, you'll immediately understand what's going on here. You're investigating this theme park, examining things, using items with other items or the world, getting into scuffles with these monsters, and solving some puzzles, and it all comes together to create a really great experience. The game's incredibly polished, refined, and the pacing is actually very well done, constantly moving you to different parts of the park, and I never found myself stuck in one area. The puzzles are pretty solid, they're not overly obtuse or complex, and I think just about anybody could figure it out. I actually beat the game without a walkthrough. But I also did have that one crow help me a few times, so I guess I got a little help. I also think this game has a great sense of exploration. They really do reward you for going off the beaten path and checking every nook and cranny. When it comes to the combat, yeah, it's probably the weakest aspect of this game. It's a little clunky, but it's not janky like Alone in the Dark or Slitterhead. I think it's actually decent. The game's got plenty of scary moments and a spooky atmosphere. What I really like is this game is not only a throwback to like Resident Evil and Silent Hill, but it also does its own thing. It carves out its own identity and it comes together in a way that most modern horror games seem to fail to do. So if you're looking for a great survival horror game that is not a remake, look no further, you got Crow Country right here. So in the number 14 spot we have Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2. This was another one of those games where I wasn't really sure how things were going to shake out. I mean, the first Space Marine came out like 15 years ago and it was being developed by Saber Interactive, but after playing all the way through and messing around with the other game modes, I gotta say, this really is one of the best Warhammer 40k games of them all. When it comes to shooters based on the 40k universe, this is the best one in my opinion. This game kind of feels like a throwback to the 360 era in the best of ways. You've got a decently length campaign, a PvE mode, and then you also have PvP. And the crazy part is that it's all good. Most games nowadays focus on just one of those things. This game really went for all three pillars. So while the game does take place after Space Marine 1 and Titus does return, the story is just kind of all over the place in this game. It's clearly part of a larger narrative. And it's very 40k. Our characters are almost completely devoid of any personality and it's all about killing the Tyranids. But you know what, that's alright with me as long as the gameplay's good, and yeah, this gameplay is good. It is a mix of a third-person shooter and a hack and slash game, where you get just a bunch of fan-favorite 40k weapons to absolutely maul these Tyranids and Chaos Marines. While you do get some iconic weapons like the bolt gun and the chainsword, you actually have a pretty big weapon roster in this game. But something they all share is that they all feel great. All of the weapons, melee or ranged, all have a certain level of heft and weight to them. Really, all of the gameplay has a certain level of weight and heft. I mean, you're playing as Space Marines, these big-ass heavy dudes, and you absolutely feel like an unstoppable badass in this game. You tear shit to shreds with these weapons. Chopping them into pieces with your melee weapons or just shooting the shit out of them with your ranged weapons, it all feels really nice. The campaign is very linear and usually has you just kind of destroying everything in sight. Occasionally you have to defend an area, but for the most part you're just blasting everything, and the game has no problem just throwing tons upon tons of enemies at you. Like, we're talking crazy numbers out here, but you aren't alone. You do have two other Space Marines to help you, and those can be human players. I played the game cooperatively and I thought it was a really great time. Outside of the campaign that takes around 8 hours to beat, there is a PvE mode known as Operations, and this is also pretty cool. You get to customize your Space Marine, and I found this enjoyable as well. And then we have the PvP. I don't love the PvP in this game, but I think it's good. You can't do executions in PvP, and you realize just how important executions are to the combat of this game. Speaking of which, the executions are phenomenal in this game. Immensely satisfying, very gory, and everything you'd want from a 40k game. I feel like this game is everything you'd want from a 40k game. It's visceral, violent, gory, and it really lets you live that Space Marine fantasy. If you're somebody who likes 40k at all and you haven't tried this game, I really don't know what you're waiting for. Even if you're somebody who doesn't know a damn thing about 40k, I still can recommend the game. It'll get you into 40k. It really is that good. And I wish I could have this game a little higher on the list, but I like the other games just a bit more. So in the number 13 spot we have the Paper Mario and the Thousand Year Door remake, one of the most anticipated Nintendo remakes of all time, maybe even the most anticipated Mario remake of all time. Like, here we are almost an entire year later and I still can't believe this is real. We were asking Nintendo forever to re-release this game in any capacity and they went and actually remade it. And I gotta say, I think this new version looks excellent. I really love how all the paper looks, the environments look nice, the lighting is really great, and yeah, the frame rate is only 30 as opposed to the original 60, but I very quickly got used to this and really didn't think it was a big deal. Outside of that though, the game is pretty much untouched from the original game. There are a few nice little quality of life improvements, but for the most part, Yeah, this is the 1,000-Year Door. So yeah, it's arguably the greatest Mario role-playing game of all time. The story is pretty much unchanged from the original. It's all about Mario trying to open this mysterious 1,000-year door. But along the way, he'll be going on a bunch of crazy adventures all over the world. He'll go up against a variety of different foes. He'll have some partners join him in the story. Oh, it's exceptional in this game. The writing is really good. It's funny, it's lively, it's rather lighthearted, but it also has a few emotional moments. I just really enjoy the dialogue and the writing of the 1,000-Year Door, and it's so weird. It's so different from legit any other Mario game. Yeah, Bowser's Inside Story and Super Mario RPG can get pretty weird also, but they're not the 1,000-Year Door weird. It's also incredibly memorable. All of the chapters are very different from each other. They're incredibly distinct, and it feels like they all try to do something different. You really go on a very grand adventure in this game, and you aren't just Mario the entire time. There's a few sequences where you actually get to play as Peach and even Bowser, and those just add even more. And when it comes to actually playing the 1,000-Year Door again, oh, it's just as great as I remember. I've played through this game a few times, and I think the game has aged beautifully. When it comes to the combat, it's easily the best combat of any Paper Mario game where you're up on the stage, it's turn-based, you have a variety of attacks, strategies, badges, abilities, you also get a partner that joins you, they also have a bunch of strategies. The time button presses that Mario RPGs are known for is here in full effect, allowing you to stay fully engaged with the combat, and it's still great to this day. And when you're not in combat, you're exploring around using your paper abilities, investigating the area, and I think this is pretty good also. Then to top everything off, we have a newly arranged soundtrack that is pretty great. I still prefer the original, but the new soundtrack is nice. Now this might come as a little bit of a hot take, but after playing all the way through this game again, I realized that I don't love the pacing to it as much as I used to. The game does take its time in a lot of these chapters, and a few of them do drag a little bit, at least in my opinion. But it's nothing too detrimental, not at all. If you haven't tried this game yet and you like Mario RPGs or you like turn-based RPGs, I recommend everybody checks it out. It's also, way more widely available than that original game, so that's certainly a plus. So in the number 12 spot, I have Tekken 8. I know, it feels like this game came out forever ago, but it actually came out back in January, and it was easily the best fighting game to release in 2024. And while I still really do like Tekken 8, and I do think it is one of the best Tekken games, I won't lie to you all, I don't like it as much as I did back when the game launched. I have cooled my jets a little bit on it. I still think though that it is a very good fighting game. I will say without a doubt the game's biggest strength is how good the fighting feels. The fighting feels really nice in this game. It's incredibly responsive, it feels immensely satisfying, and everything really just comes together, especially when you're talking about the control. Like, this might be the best controlling Tekken game of them all. It just feels phenomenal. It's just so fluid, the animations are incredible, the presentation is just outstanding. This is like the best looking fighting game of them all. It looks really great, and it really just adds to the fighting. The character roster actually has a ton of depth. Every single character just has so many strategies, moves, combos. It's crazy. It's downright impressive just how many different moves every single character has. I think the roster is pretty strong currently as well, and it's clear they're going to be adding more and more to it. Now, something that I initially really liked that I'm not so huge on anymore is just how aggressive the game wants you to be. It really wants you to be aggressive to get your health back, and yeah, this is cool and it adds another layer and makes it different from, say, Tekken 7, but I just don't love it. Here we are a year later, and I kind of prefer the fighting mechanics of Tekken 7 just a little bit more. Something though that is wholeheartedly better than Tekken 7 is Tekken 8's content. Not only is there a story mode that is actually pretty good, it's like 4 to 5 hours long with some fun throwbacks to, say, Tekken Force. There's other gameplay modes. The online multiplayer is fantastic. It's better than Tekken 7. It doesn't take ages to load. And there's also just a ton of fan service to longtime Tekken fans, me, and I think that's pretty awesome. Something though that I think hasn't been awesome is this game's battle pass, or whatever they want to call it, and also the DLC strategy where you don't get the stages as part of the season pass. Are you serious? I don't really care for battle passes in like any game, and I don't know why they're nickel and diming me. I paid $70 for this game. Like, isn't that enough? All that aside, I think Tekken 8 is a great game. It's one of the best fighting games on the market, and it continues to prove why Tekken really is the king of 3D fighting. We'll see if Virtua Fighter has anything to say, but I doubt it. So in the number 11 spot, we have the Silent Hill 2 remake. Like everybody else, I really wasn't sure how this one was going to play out. Bloober Team has a very shaky track record.
I can't even fucking imagine why you would have to do this.
But after playing all the way through it, I'm so happy to say that it actually is very good. Is it better than the original? I don't think so, but I still think it is a great way to experience Silent Hill 2. Something the developers absolutely nailed about this game though was the presentation. This is a great looking game, one of the best looking games of 2024. Everything from the environments to the lighting to the character models and especially the facial animations, it all just looks amazing. The presentation is top notch here, and all of the new music and remixes, it's all really great stuff. When it comes to the story, this is where I wasn't sure if Bloober was really up to snuff. Were they going to be able to honor the original game's amazing story and exceptional storytelling? Well, you know what? They actually did a pretty good job with the story in this game. Not only does it honor the original, but they actually add a few scenes and moments that add even more to this story. It's all about James Sunderland, who mysteriously gets a letter from his wife that passed away 3 years ago telling him to come to the town of Silent Hill, and so he goes reluctantly. And what unfolds is one of the most legendary video game stories of all time. Like, it was great then, and it's just as good now. But when it comes to actually playing Silent Hill 2, it has been modernized. The camera is now over the shoulder. The melee combat has been improved significantly, shooting also feels better, and the game's had plenty of, quote, modern sensibilities and tweaks added. So there's plenty of mantling, the environment's a little bit more interactive, you can push dumpsters to climb on top of them, and they've added some new areas and sections to really every single area. I won't lie to y'all, some of these I don't really care for. I think a few of these don't add anything to the game whatsoever and it feels more like padding. But at least a few of the new gameplay sections and areas were kind of neat. The game is quite a bit longer than the original. The original took around 8 hours to finish. This is around 14 hours to finish, and while I do think it goes on a little too long and the pacing isn't as strong as the originals, I still have zero problems recommending the game. It still is the legendary Silent Hill 2. The shooting and the melee combat is certainly better. The combat in general is a lot more refined and intuitive. The story is still really great. The game looks amazing, and minor pacing issues aside, I still think the game is a must play. If you're somebody that likes horror games, maybe you played the original game, or you love great stories in video games, oh, this one should be near the top of your list. And I really think Bloober deserves a pat on the back for just how good of a job they did remaking Silent Hill 2. The task was not easy and there was a lot of pressure, but Bloober, for the most part, really hit it out of the park. And if Konami announced that they were going to remake another Silent Hill game, I'd be pretty excited. Well, from one remake to another, here we have Persona 3 Reload. Now, I played the original Persona 3 FES on PS2, and while I liked the game, I had a number of issues with it. So when I saw that they were remaking Persona 3, I was very excited because this was a chance for them to address a ton of the issues the original game had, and not only do I think that they address almost all of those issues, but they really let Persona 3 reach its full potential, and they created easily the definitive way to play Persona 3. I will never go back to that PS2 game again, or the PSP version. When it comes to the story, is essentially untouched from the original game. You play as a transfer student who's come back home after a very long time, and he's just trying to live a normal life where he goes to high school, but there's this mysterious dark hour. While the story does take a bit of time to get going and the pacing is a little on the slow side, I absolutely think it's worth it. The story in Persona 3 is just wonderful. Not only does it have some of the most memorable, likable characters of any JRPG, but the game is just full of memorable moments. There's lots of drama, there's moments that are funny, sad, anxiety-inducing. Like, this game has you really going through the motions, and the ending is particularly emotional. All these years later, Persona 3 really still has an excellent story, and they've added a little bit here and there. There's some extra flavor text, but that was always one aspect of Persona 3 that I thought was fantastic. All of my issues in the original game stem from the gameplay, and they've actually addressed just about all of them here. So like the other Persona games, there's really two aspects to the gameplay. There's the life sim element where during the day you're just a high school student. You can go hang out with other students, study, you make social links with other characters, level up your social stats, and really just take in the world. This is pretty much unchanged from the original game. When it comes to the combat and the dungeon crawling specifically though, this has actually been improved considerably. The tired mechanic from the original game is just straight up gone, and like the original, you're exploring 200 plus floors of Tartarus. And while I still don't love exploring Tartarus since it is randomly generated floors and a lot of them feel similar, at least it's a lot faster, the dungeon crawling controls better, and the floor design seems to have a little bit more depth to it at least. But yeah, Tartarus just goes on way too long. When it comes to the actual battle system, yeah, it's just way better than the original. You can actually control all of your party members, and it plays very similar to Persona 5. It's that SMT gameplay you know and love, and yeah, it's just a straight improvement on the original game. Yes, it is a lot easier for sure, but it makes you realize that it shouldn't have been that difficult to begin with. And after playing all the way through this, yeah, I really just could never go back to the original games again. But since this is a remake after all, you would think that they would improve the graphics, and as you can see, yes, the graphics are fantastic in this game. It has a great sense of style, the menus look incredible, the animation, character models, environments, it's all very well done. The soundtrack is amazing, like the soundtrack is really good in this game, and it was great in the original, but all the new stuff here, oh, it's so good also. Persona 3 Reload is easily one of the best JRPGs of the year, one of the best remakes of all time, and is absolutely worth your time. Whether you've played the original or not, doesn't really matter. I think you're still going to like this one. Well, it might surprise a few folks, but in the number 9 spot, I have Angerfoot. If you're unfamiliar with this one, it is one of the craziest games of 2024. And it very well might be one of the most aggressive video games made of all time. The game sees you playing as the titular Angerfoot, a really angry dude who has an awesome sneaker collection until that collection gets stolen. So it's up to him to get his kicks back from a bunch of these assholes. I actually really like the setting and tone of Angerfoot. The city's known as Shit City, and this game's just got a certain vibe that I really appreciate. And when it comes to the gameplay, I think the best way to describe it is Hotline Miami but in first person and with a lot more kicking. This game easily has the best kicking of any video game hands down. It's a central gameplay mechanic. You'll be kicking fools left and right, kicking doors down, kicking projectiles back, kicking.
Kicking? Oh, I want to do some kicking!
Why, you?
But man, does it all feel so good. I love the kicking in this game. Not only does it feel great, but it's immensely satisfying. You do get other weapons though, and these also feel nice as well. The game is incredibly fast paced. Everything dies in pretty much one hit, including yourself, and so you'll be just blasting through these levels, killing everything in sight, and trying not to get owned yourself. These levels are all very short, and it's all about trial and error here, very similar to Hotline Miami. But I would argue it gets even more hectic than Hotline Miami just from the fact that it's in first person. The entire game is also set to the music, so the tempo starts going up when shit starts getting crazy, and you just feel like an absolute badass in this game. And this game just really gets balls to the wall crazy. Like, shit just gets loony out here. It is so fast paced, sometimes you can barely even see what's going on. But man, it is so much fun. I was just smiling ear to ear pretty much the entire time I played this game. Like, I was having a great time. All of these levels are great. They're all decently different from each other. And while the level design isn't anything too special, it's set up in a way so that you feel like this unstoppable force of nature. As you play through the game, you actually do get some side objectives as well, like not firing a single bullet and just kicking everybody, and a few other ones. And if you do these, you actually unlock new shoes, and a bunch of these shoes have different abilities, and some of them can really alter your gameplay. It's actually worth it to try to get some of these other shoes. There's a little bit of replayability here. The pacing is really great throughout. The music is just incredible, and I love the game's aesthetic and mood. It is one ugly game though, and I mean that as a compliment. Angerfoot is, in my opinion, the best first-person shooter of the year and one of the best indie games to come out all year. It's even crazier than Mullet Mad Jack, and I just had a really great time with it. While I know that not everybody is as big of a fan as this as I am, man, I love this game. So here we have a game you probably didn't expect to see on this list. It is Ace Attorney Investigations 2 Prosecutor's Gambit. And I know what you might be thinking, Jonathan, this game came out on the DS like a decade plus ago. Why do you have it on this list? Well, the game came out a decade plus ago on the DS in Japan only. This was the first time the game released anywhere outside of Japan, so it's a new game to the rest of the world. But if that wasn't enough, it also basically got a remake with the Ace Attorney Investigations collection. I mean, this is the closest thing we'll have to a remake of this game. All of the character sprites have been completely redone. They're now hand-drawn. The environments look nicer. Everything's been recreated for much higher resolutions than the DS. Yeah, I consider this a new game, and it was one of the best games of 2024. It's crazy. This is just a spin-off of the main Ace Attorney series where you play as Miles Edgeworth, everyone's favorite prosecutor who does a series of investigations, and that's all I'm going to say. This game still is very narrative focused like the main Ace Attorney series. It's just from a different perspective and the other side of the law. But man, the story in this game is fan-freaking-tastic. I was just blown away with how good the story, characters, writing, dialogue, and drama is. Every single character is memorable, likable. They all have their own funny little quirks and moments. There's not a single bad character here, and now that I've played more of the Ace Attorney series, I realize that there's a bunch of fun little references to the other games. But not only are the characters fantastic, well written, and have very clear motivations, but their interactions are just legendary. Like, everybody has great conversations with one another, but the story is really excellent because of how everything is just incredibly interconnected. From the first few minutes of the game all the way up until the very end, everything means something. and this game has genuinely some of the best payoffs I've ever seen in a video game. The storytelling is just exceptional. I didn't see any of the plot twists coming. It's incredibly unpredictable, and every single case is just amazing. Obviously, with this being primarily a visual novel, the narrative is going to be the most important aspect, but oh, it is not just good. It really is one of the best stories I've ever seen in a video game. And again, this is just a spin-off in the Ace Attorney series. Shit's wild. But when it actually comes to playing this game, it is a little different from the other Ace Attorney games. It is still, yes, primarily a visual novel, so you're just looking at a screen while two characters talk. But the gameplay here is more involved than any of the main Ace Attorney games. You actually get to walk around the investigation scenes, examining things, putting clues together, solving puzzles, deducing information, and of course calling people out. You'll even get to cross-examine people right on the spot. And while I'm not going to act like this gameplay is exceptional, and it more than gets the job done, and it allowed me to stay engaged with the entire game. But all of this wouldn't mean much if the cases themselves weren't that interesting, but they are. All of these cases are excellent. These are some of the best cases the series has ever seen, and I was just kind of blown away by it all. The pacing is also really great in this game. They're constantly keeping things interesting, and the game is a really good length to it, taking well over 30 hours to beat, and it's so worth it in my opinion. The presentation's great, the music's awesome, and it has one of the most unforgettable stories of any game that I've played in recent memory. I can't recommend it enough. Even if you don't really like visual novels, I still recommend this game. I'm not the biggest visual novel guy. I like Danganronpa and I like Ace Attorney, but man, this game was something else. It really was. So the next game we have here is Animal Well. Now when 2024 started, this game wasn't even a blip on my radar, but after it came out and I heard so many great things about it, I just had to check it out. And after playing through the entire game in almost one sitting, all I gotta say is, this is a really great game. This is one of the best Metroidvanias I've ever played, and I was kind of shocked with just how good this game is. So the game just kind of drops your character into this massive world, and you're not really given much direction or instruction on what even you're supposed to do. It's up to you to just explore, and explore you do in this game. It is a Metroidvania through and through. There's plenty of platforming and puzzle solving, but often enough you'll get an ability, and now all of a sudden you can go to a bunch of new areas using said ability, and the game's map just expands and expands. You get even more abilities. It continues growing and growing, and the level design is just so well done. It is so incredibly handcrafted and engaging. Every single screen has a secret or two. This game has so many secrets, hundreds, dozens even of secrets, and you'll want to uncover them all. This game has maybe the best sense of exploration I've ever gotten from a Metroidvania. I'm not even kidding. It really is that great. What's even crazier, there's no combat in this game whatsoever. All of your abilities are used purely for exploration, and it's just so great. I was having such a blast. Once I started playing this game, I just couldn't put it down. I had to find the next secret, the next ability. I had to just explore every nook and cranny that I possibly could until it was like 3 in the morning. The game is a very subdued, subtle, simple art style and aesthetic, but I just really like the vibe and mood of this game. Sometimes simplicity really is king. I feel like I could talk about this game for several more minutes, but I really don't want to spoil anything. Part of this game's appeal is figuring everything out yourself. Don't look up a guide, don't look up a walkthrough, don't look up where the secrets are. Sit down, figure everything out for yourself, and I think you're gonna have a really great time. I never found myself getting really all that lost either. As long as you're exploring everything, you'll be more than fine, and you'll be able to beat the game in around 8 to 10 hours, and it's a really good 8 to 10 hours. This is one game I recommend to everybody. So in the number 6 spot we have Earth Defense Force 6. This is the most Jonathan pick of them all. I'm sure some people are going to be scratching their head and going, really? You think this game is better than all the prior games you talked about? Well, this is my list after all, based off of my preferences, and I love the Earth Defense Force series to death. Sure, it's got plenty of issues, but man, I had such a great time while playing through this new game. It is maybe the best EDF game of them all. If you're unfamiliar with this series, it's the series where you blast all the buggos. But nowadays, the series has evolved a little bit. You're blasting more than bugs. You're now taking out amphibians, aliens, robots, and giant fish creatures. The point is that you're blasting everything in sight, and it is just as much fun as it sounds. There is a story here. The game takes place after Earth Defense Force 5, but the story is not really all that important here. You could take it or leave it. At least the voice acting is just as hilarious as it's always been. The game is very, very cheesy. It knows that, and it plays it up. While it tries to be serious at times, for the most part it is very lighthearted, goofy, and just kind of all over the place. What really makes Earth Defense Force awesome though is the moment-to-moment gameplay. I am incapable of booting this game up and not having a good time. The gameplay isn't complex at all. It's very simple actually. You're dropped into these environments and are told to kill everything. Wipe everything out that isn't a human. There's 4 different classes to choose from: a ranger, the wing diver, the fencer, and the air raider. They all get big guns, special equipment, and they all have their own strengths and weaknesses, but you're doing the same thing no matter which class you are. You're annihilating everything, and you don't just annihilate stuff in this game, you just straight up eviscerate it. Similar to Helldivers 2, when you shoot enemies or blow them up or burn them, you turn them into mincemeat, like tiny little pieces. The game just lets you rip these enemies to shreds, even better than Helldivers 2. Helldivers 2 was a fun warm-up, but now the real man's game is here, EDF 6. And if you didn't just unsubscribe from that potentially cringe comment, all I gotta say is the weapons feel fantastic in this game as well. Everything feels so nice. Every single weapon, all of the explosions are great. The game just goes balls to the wall crazy, and it lets you get as crazy as you want it to be. I mean, most of the time it's the game setting up these crazy scenarios where you're dropped into this desolate city and you just get swarmed by dozens of enemies at once, and the enemy roster is actually really great in this game. Over the years, EDF has slowly built up just a really good roster. There's way more than just the ants. There's multiple types of ants, spiders, frogs, aliens, robots, these fish creatures, various types of UFOs, these tentacle creatures known as the Cruel. Yeah, there's actually a good enemy roster here, and they all have different strategies to take out, and the game loves mixing it up, throwing a bunch of different enemy types at you at once. And while I'm not going to act like this is the most advanced combat in a shooter, it is some of the most fun. There's nothing like a hard day of work and then you come home and turn your brain off and just blast everything in sight. This game really just tickles my brain in a certain way that makes me go hee, that always has me coming back for more. You can even play the entire game cooperatively, where shit gets even crazier. And you might go, well, Jonathan, if every single mission just has you blasting everything in sight, doesn't the game get pretty repetitive? Oh yeah, it absolutely gets repetitive. I've played every single EDF game prior, and I can tell you, they're all basically the same when it comes to the gameplay, but this is one of those scenarios where I just don't really care. It's just so much fun that I can overlook how repetitive and stale the gameplay really gets. That, and you have to run around to go pick up all the armor and weapon drops. Like, it's clear that's just going to be sticking around. When it comes to the presentation, this is easily one of the ugliest games of 2024, but hey, the game runs flawlessly. Never had any issues with the frame rate no matter how much shit was going on, so I'm not really going to complain here. Look, EDF 6, clearly not for everybody. If you don't like shooters, you're not going to like this. It can get pretty repetitive. It also takes well over 50 hours to complete, but it is genuinely some of the most fun I've had with any video game in 2024, and that's what gets it so high on the list. I have no problem recommending it, especially if you're looking for a crazy time. So in the number 5 spot, we have my addiction on full display. We have Balatro. If you haven't heard of Balatro at this point, maybe just turn away while you're still ahead. But if you're still here, let me tell you about the greatest poker game ever made. Alright, it's a little bit more than just poker. Basically, it is a poker game that is also a roguelike deck builder. And while it might appear a little unintuitive or even confusing at first, after even 20 minutes of playing this game, you'll immediately understand how to play and why people like it as much as they do. I think there's really 2 types of people. People who love Balatro, and then the people who have never played Balatro. At some point in my life, I was in the latter category. Yes, shameful, I know. And I was like, really? A poker game? Is it all that good? So then I finally gave it a shot, and all I gotta say is, oh yeah, this game is crazy good. It is just mad addicting. While playing poker by itself is fun and all, the game really mixes it up with these jokers, which randomly show up that you can equip, that drastically change the outcome of every single hand, really every single game. And these aren't like little bonuses that they're giving you and then they stack up like, oh, plus 5 chips here, plus 10 chips here. No, we're talking like, oh, if you play a king, your score multiplies by 3. Oh, but then if you also get a flush, that entire score multiplies by 12. Oh, and then this other joker makes it so everything goes again. And then this other joker, you can see where I'm going here. All of these multipliers and points really start stacking and you start getting these crazy combos, and you just feel so freaking powerful. You feel like a genius when you're able to pull off some of these crazy combinations and you start getting some really high points and the flames show up, and then the game will also start to mess with you. It'll see what strategies you're doing. It'll try to stop you. It'll throw some really big blinds. It'll throw an annoying boss your way where it's got an ability that will like disable a bunch of specific cards or do some other nonsense, but you'll just get creative with your problem solving, and the game becomes incredibly dynamic because it is a roguelike. Pretty much everything is randomized. randomized. When you lose, you got to start from scratch. But this is one game where I was just able to start over and over and over, no problem. I'm not the biggest roguelike guy. I don't love starting over from scratch all the time, but with this game, it really was actually hitting different. On top of that, I love the game's aesthetic and music. It's just like straight up hypnotic. I don't know how else to describe it. The music is incredible. Like, it's dynamic and adapts to what's currently happening on screen. So when a boss shows up, yeah, it gets a little more serious. When good things are happening, it's a bit more cheerful. It's just such a good tune, and I really genuinely love how this game looks. I just love this game to pieces. It's one of those games that I could easily put over 100 hours in if I wasn't playing all these other games and doing videos. And if I could only play one game for the next year of my life, I would pick this game. It really is that good. Balatro is just stupidly good. You wouldn't expect it from a little poker game, but man, it really just, it is so good. And what's crazy is that I can recommend this game to everybody that breathes. Even if you don't like card games, you don't like poker, you don't like solitaire, you don't like roguelikes, doesn't matter. Try this game. This game will change your mind. I really genuinely believe that anybody can play this game and enjoy it. When I was at the Las Vegas airport on a layover, I saw this like 70, 80-year-old dude playing it on his phone, and he was having the time of his life. If he can do it, anybody can do it. It's on phones, every console, PC, you name it. You got no reason to not try this game unless you're trying to avoid a time vampire, because you'll get sucked into this one. I sure did. Alright, so at this point, well actually a few entries ago, we're just kind of at legendary status. I like all of these games pretty equally, and I like some more than others, but only by like a fraction of an amount. What I'm trying to say is I like all of these games a lot, and in the number 4 spot we have Astrobot. So I'll be honest with you all, back when I worked for Sony, I did see that they were making a sequel to Astro's Playroom, and man, I was hype immediately. I knew this shit was going to be good, but it wasn't just good, it was freaking phenomenal. Astrobot is a lot of things. It's one of the best games Sony has ever put out, it's one of the best 3D platformers, and it's one of the best celebrations of gaming that I've ever seen. This game is just astounding through and through. If you're somebody that loves video games as a medium, or maybe you've played a bunch of games in the past, this game is a must play immediately. The game really is an expansion on the PS5 pack-in title Astro's Playroom, which I already thought was brilliant, so to see it as a fully realized game, oh, it's incredible. The game was just a joy to play through from start to finish. So the story sees our robot, Astrobot, going through space with all of his buddies on their intergalactic PS5 when they get jumped by this green, mean alien who steals all the PS5 parts like a true scalper and sends all of the other Astrobots flying all over these different worlds. They really get scattered, and so it's up to Astrobot to get everyone back together and fix the ship. The story, it's fine. It's really just a means to have you go rescue everybody and fix the ship. What really makes Astrobot amazing is the fan service, the gameplay, the presentation, actually pretty much everything. So the game is a 3D platformer. A majority of the moment-to-moment gameplay is platforming, and the platforming is actually very well done. Astrobot is a pretty simple moveset. He can punch, he can do a little spin, and he has these jets to let him stay in the air for a few seconds. But what makes the platforming and these levels by extension great is that he gets a bunch of abilities. Depending on the level, you actually get a special ability. Some of these are pretty simple, like being able to grab stuff far away. Sometimes it's a bit more complex, like being able to shrink, or getting a jetpack that lets you blast off Buzz Lightyear style. Every single level feels different from the last. The level design is actually exceptionally well done. It feels actually kind of reminiscent of like a 3D Mario game. It's that good. The levels are varied, engaging, and are just a good time all around. They also look fantastic. This is a great looking game. It looks like a straight up Pixar movie. It looks so good. But there is actually more to these levels than just getting from point A to B. There are a few collectibles. The main collectible is the other bots. Yeah, you gotta rescue all these other Astrobots. But they're not all a bunch of generic bots. Most of them are cameos and references to older video games, not just PlayStation games either. This game actually goes crazy with the references and crossovers. It might be the biggest crossover of any video game ever. I don't know, it's pretty hard to beat Smash Ultimate thanks to the spirits, but if you exclude the spirits, yeah, it's the biggest crossover ever. When I mean that they reference hundreds of video games, I mean hundreds of video games. Jak and Daxter, Ratchet & Clank, Crash Bandicoot, Infamous, Uncharted, Resident Evil, Ape Escape, Gravity Rush, Last of Us, Parappa the Rappa, Wipeout, Tomb Raider, Spider-Man, Horizon, God of War, the list goes on and on and on and on. It is actually insane, and a lot of the fun was just seeing which character I was going to get next. I actually 100%ed this game. There are very few games that I will 100%, especially nowadays when I'm playing so many games, but this was one of them where I sat down and I said, I have to get everything. I have to see everything, and that's how I think everybody should play this game. It's incredibly rewarding. The game actually does reward you for getting everything, and it was so much fun to collect everything in this game. I was having just such a great time, and it was one of those experiences that I really didn't want to end. I kind of felt like a kid again. I was like, what do you mean the game's over? I played like 15 to 20 hours of it and I was done, and I just wanted more from it. I know they've been updating it a little bit, which is cool, but it really was just one of those games that I couldn't stop playing. It's not only one of the best 3D platformers in a very long time, but it straight up is just one of the best gaming experiences you could have on the PS5. I highly recommend it to everybody. Alright, so in the number 3 spot we have Metaphor ReFantazio. Now, I knew this was going to be big when it came out. I mean, it was being developed by Atlus, the people who made Persona and the Shin Megami Tensei series, and not only is it just as good as those series, it might even be better. This game really is the quintessential turn-based JRPG. It is easily the best turn-based JRPG of the 2020s, and I'll just say immediately, if you're somebody who likes role-playing games whatsoever, this is just a must-play, straight up. Where do I even begin with this game? I guess I can begin with the first thing you see, how it looks. This is a great looking game. I love the art style. There's so much detail to the environments and these characters. I love the animation, and the menus just go so hard in this game. The menus look absolutely incredible, nothing short of astounding, and the frame rate was great also. But I guess the next thing to talk about is the story. I will just say the story is nothing short of remarkable in this game. It is absolutely brilliant, and it's one of the best stories of any video game in 2024. All of the characters are fantastic. They're all exceptionally well written. The dialogue is just really great in this game. The drama's high. Everyone has such distinct personalities, and your main party is probably going to go down as one of the best parties of any JRPG. It really is that great. Everyone's awesome. The story only gets better and better the more you play it. Yeah, it starts a little slow at first, but trust me, when this shit gets good, it gets really good, especially towards the end of the game. Oh, shit just starts hitting the fan, and I'm just like, holy shit, this fucking game. The story is really good shit, and I don't want to spoil a single thing. When it comes to the gameplay, I'll say it plays kind of like Persona, but it also very much does its own thing. Since you aren't high school students locked to a single town, you're actually going all around the world, and it feels like they really expanded on the whole time management aspect that Persona has. Outside of that though, you're going through dungeons, you're getting into fights, and yeah, it's some of the best turn-based battles you'll ever find in a video game. The game is a pretty robust job system. It's actually incredibly well done, and you can build your characters however the hell you want to build them, and you can have them switch between jobs on the fly pretty much. And I had a lot of fun just trying everything out. There's actually a lot of depth with the combat, more so than even Persona. And as you play the game more and more, the depth just increases. It keeps getting deeper and deeper until you got like Grand Canyon levels of depth out here. New jobs unlock, you get new strategies, you up your social links, or whatever they're called in this game, bonds. Like the story, the gameplay really just gets better and better. It's one of those games in general that just continues to get better and better, but it starts out really great also. It doesn't take 20-30 hours to get good. No, it starts out great and then it just becomes exceptional. This is a pretty long game. Not like Persona 4 or 5 long, but it's still going to take you well over 50 or 60 hours, but it's absolutely worth it in my opinion. The soundtrack's also worth listening to. It's very, very different from any other JRPG I've ever played, but I actually quite like it. Metaphor really is just a phenomenal game through and through. I have no problem recommending this game to absolutely everybody. Even if you don't like turn-based RPGs, you want it action-oriented, you still might like this game. It has a few action moments, like when you're running around in the overworld, you can attack enemies and even kill them. So there, it's not totally turn-based. You've really got no excuse to not play this, is what I'm saying. And so with that, the only thing I got left to say about the game is go play it. Alright, so in the number 2 spot we have Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Say what you will about this game, but you gotta admit, it's pretty incredible how much work Square Enix put into every single aspect of this game. And I really just think that this is an absolutely phenomenal video game. So the game is a sequel to the Final Fantasy VII Remake. It takes place directly after, and I would very, very much recommend you play Remake before you play this one. So all I gotta say for the story is that it's about Cloud and friends going on a pretty epic adventure. The story is just phenomenal in this game. Well, yes, at the end of the day, it is a remake of Final Fantasy VII's story. They really heavily expand on every single aspect. The game takes its time, it adds a bunch of extra stuff, and the storytelling, it is just so good in this game. I found myself hooked immediately. All of the characters are so well done in this game. Like Metaphor, there's not a bad character here. All of the dialogue's great. Your party's just incredible. There's not a bad apple in the bunch. I even like shitty, annoying Chadley. I really genuinely like all of the characters here. The dialogue is great. The storytelling, chef's kiss out here. Yeah, the game loves to take its sweet ass time, but it is so worth it in my opinion. And when it comes to the gameplay, they really expand on the Final Fantasy VII Remake. I love the Final Fantasy VII Remake, but man, this game, when it comes to the gameplay, it's much better. They drop you into several large open worlds where you are free to explore to your heart's content, and there's actually a good amount of stuff to see here. Sure, it's not the most innovative when it comes to the open world gameplay. You're climbing tall things, you're finding some collectibles, and participating in some mini games, but I found all the open world activities to be pretty engaging for the most part. Yeah, there are a lot of mini games and the game forces you to do a majority of them, but I wouldn't really say that they distract from the overall game. I mean, the original Final Fantasy VII had all of these as well, and you usually only ever have to do these mini games like once. The rest is optional. But when you're not in the mini games or exploring the open world, you're getting into combat, and I think the combat is just as good as the previous game, if not even better. It's an excellent mix of action and turn-based combat. Yeah, it still is in real time. You're still attacking in real time and doing special abilities, but you still frequently go into the menus to use spells and other attacks, and I think it all flows really well actually. Like, the combat just absolutely comes together. What makes it as great as it is also is just how varied it is. All of the characters play incredibly different. Cloud plays nothing like Tifa, Tifa's nothing like Barrett, Barrett's nothing like Aerith, Aerith's nothing like Red 13. We could be here all day. None of the characters play anything alike. But what's awesome is that it's great to play as all of these characters. I never sighed and went, oh, I gotta play as Aerith or Tifa. No, I was happy to play as one of these characters. It's so much fun to play as all of these characters. I love how different they are, and it kept the gameplay incredibly varied. The game in general has a lot of variety. You go to a lot of different environments and do a lot of things. The game absolutely does take its sweet ass time. I know plenty of people are quick to say that this game wastes your time. Yeah, it does in certain aspects, but I was eating this shit up. I was smelling what it was cooking. I just loved pretty much every aspect of the gameplay. I also love how this game looks. It is a great looking video game. Zero complaints there, and the soundtrack, it's just legendarily good. If you're somebody that likes RPGs and you haven't checked this one out, I don't know what you're waiting for unless you don't have a PS5. It is coming to PC very soon. Get it while it's on there. You won't regret it. You have easily 70 to 100 hours if you do even a little bit of the side content, and it's all pretty great. I really can't wait for part 3 at this point because Rebirth, oh, it is so good. But it's not my top game. In the #1 spot, you probably all guessed it already, but it is Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. Yes, my favorite game from 2024 is the latest in the Yakuza Like a Dragon franchise. I have made it no secret that this is pretty much my favorite series at this point in gaming, and this new game really was everything I could have ever wanted from it. I just absolutely fell in love with this game. I put well over 100 hours into it. I did everything I could. I loved basically every aspect. I'm sure some people will say, oh, Metaphor or Final Fantasy or even Persona 3 Reload are better RPGs with better stories and more in-depth mechanics, but this is my list and I just freaking love this game. I was head over heels for Infinite Wealth. It takes place after the 7th Yakuza game that is Like a Dragon, and it sees Ichiban returning, but this time he goes to Hawaii for reasons, I'll just say, and there he's joined by series veteran Kiryu. The story in this game, it is so ridiculously good. I love the story to this game, especially the first half. Like, I was just totally immersed, engaged, whatever you want to call it with this story. I was real into this shit. While I don't exactly love how the game ends, I still really think the story is just phenomenal. I love all the characters, the dialogue. There's so many amazing set pieces and moments. Like, the game just keeps going and going and it just gets better and better. And then when it comes to the gameplay, it really is an extension on what they had in the previous game. You're dropped into this decent sized map and it is a turn-based RPG. You can freely explore Hawaii and there's a lot to see and do here. There's plenty of sub-stories, but there's also major side quests like Sujimon and Dondoko Island. But this open world, I'll just say, it's actually really well developed. While it isn't as handcrafted or in-depth as some of the previous Yakuza maps, I still really liked it. It's easily the biggest map that this series has ever had, and it's one of the best open worlds of 2024. But there's more to this game than running around the pretty map. There's also the combat. The combat is just a straight up improvement on what they had in the previous game. There's actually a bit more depth to it. You get up to 4 party members, and the combat, it's really good shit. While it isn't the most in-depth and it's not as fast as, say, Dragon Quest, it's quirky, it's weird, it's got its own personality, and once you unlock the jobs, yeah, it actually does expand quite a bit. Like the Yakuza series in general, you will need to do precise button timing with attacking and defending, so the game does keep you engaged despite it being a turn-based battle system, and the game also really plays into movement. That was my biggest issue with the previous game, is that the characters just kind of randomly walked around, and if they were near something they would pick it up, but oftentimes they wouldn't pick shit up even when they were right next to it. Here, you can freely move the characters around, they can interact with the environment however you want, and I just had a lot of fun with this battle system. I like trying out all of the different jobs. I like how every character has strengths and weaknesses. They're all pretty different from each other. There's just dozens of different enemies. Like, there's a lot of enemy types in this game, and I really did find myself truly engaged, especially when the boss fights show up. They can actually rock your shit also, which is pretty nice. The game does put up a little bit of a challenge, especially if you're not doing the side content. But me, I did all the side content. I was loving all this shit. I love the combat. I love exploring the map. The presentation is really well done. Like, this is a good looking game. RGG used to put out some real ugly ass games. Not anymore. This is a good looking game. The soundtrack, the soundtrack is crazy good in this game. I don't know if it's as good as the previous Yakuza game, but it's got a really good soundtrack. I've been using the music in plenty of my videos for a reason. And then the game really just has so much content to it. Sure, if you stick to just the main story, you can beat it in probably around 50 or 60 hours, but man, where's the fun in that? The sub-stories are some of the best sub-stories that the series has ever seen. All of the side stuff is actually really well developed, and none of it feels like generic cookie cutter filler side content. Forget Rise of Ronin, forget the Assassin's Creed games, forget all these other open world games where all the side content is just immediately forgettable and it doesn't even feel like it's worth your time. Not this one. This game has side content that is almost as good as the main story. No joke. The game also has a ton, and I mean a ton, of fan service if you've played the previous Yakuza games or you're just a fan of Sega in general. Like, I love Sega to death, so I love seeing all of these references. I loved all the Yakuza references. This game is just so good. Maybe I'm fanboying over here, but if you asked me what my favorite game from 2024 was, I'm going to point at this game. And that's why it's the #1 game on my list. There's no other game I'd rather play over this one. And it really warms my heart to not only see this game get a simultaneous worldwide release, but to see so many people love it as well. I remember when Yakuza was this tiny little underground series, we were just begging, hoping that Yakuza 0 would come out in the West. And then when it did, things changed forever and for the better. Yakuza, it's a mainstay now in modern gaming, and it's one of the best series you could get into. And the last thing I will say is that if you're one of those people who didn't get into this game or stopped being into the Yakuza series because it became a turn-based RPG, you're lost. You're really missing out on some great shit. But alright, that is it for me today. I have been yapping for several hours at this point. This is a long ass video, so if you made it to this part of the video, thank you. Yes, you. So much. I really appreciate it. I love you all, and I hope you enjoyed the video. I tried to talk about as many games from as many different genres as I possibly could. I feel like I covered basically everything here, and yeah, I'm getting pretty tired. My throat's getting sore here from talking, and this is going to be a bitch to edit. So if you've made it to this part of the video, the very end of the video, you can comment our code word. You will get a heart from me. The code word today is love, because I love you all. I hope you stay safe. Thank you all so much for watching. Please share, like, comment, subscribe. Any support is really, and I mean really, truly appreciated. I spent so much time working on this video. I don't know what idiot thought 60 was a good number. I'm probably not doing this again, but you know what? I did it all for you. I hope you all enjoy it. Bye-bye now. I'm rambling, so yeah, see you later.